New York City was trying to drown itself tonight. The rain wasn't just falling. It was being driven into the pavement like nails by a wind that screamed down the avenues, rattling the bones of the old buildings and the teeth of anyone foolish enough to be caught outside. I adjusted my grip on the handle of the umbrella, fighting a losing battle against the gale. The metal frame groaned, threatening to snap and turn inside out, useless against the onslaught. Beside me, Lily shivered violently. She was pressing her small body against my hip, trying to walk in my rhythm, but her little legs were struggling to keep up with my anxious pace. I pulled her closer, wrapping part of my worn wool coat around her shoulders, though it was barely enough to keep me warm, let alone shield both of us from the biting November chill. We should have been home 20 minutes ago. The late shift at the diner had run over because the manager, a man with grease permanently etched into his fingerprints and a soul to match, decided the floor wasn't mopped to his impossible standards. I hadn't argued. I couldn't afford to argue. Every extra dollar was a carton of milk, a loaf of bread, or a box of crayons to keep a traumatized boy silent and occupied while I worked double shifts. "Maria, my socks are wet," Lily murmured, her voice small and miserable, barely audible over the roar of the city storm. "I know, Bug. I'm sorry. We're almost there. Just 2 more blocks," I promised, scanning the street with vigilant eyes. The street was desolate, possessing the kind of emptiness that usually signaled trouble in this neighborhood. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, jumping shadows against the brick facades of the tenements. Most people had the sense to be indoors, hidden away from the storm and the predators that prowled when the sun went down. But we were exposed, 2 small figures moving through the gray wash of the night. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a sensation that had become my constant companion over the last 7 days. Ever since I found him, ever since I brought a ghost into our home. Every siren wail made me jump. Every shadow looked like a monster. Ahead, under the halo of a street lamp that buzzed like an angry hornet, there was a man. He didn't belong here. It wasn't just the way he stood, tall, commanding, taking up space as if he owned the very concrete beneath his feet. It was the silhouette of him. Even through the sheets of rain, the cut of his coat was too sharp, the fabric too heavy and expensive to be worn by anyone who lived in a 5-block radius of my apartment. He wasn't walking with purpose, and he wasn't looking for trouble. He was doing something that made my steps falter, my protective instincts flaring hot and bright. He was wrestling with a thick roll of paper and a staple gun, fighting the wind to affix a flyer to the wooden utility pole. A black SUV, sleek and ominous like a land shark, idled a few yards away. The engine purred with a low, menacing rumble that vibrated in my chest. 2 men in dark trench coats stood by the vehicle, looking miserable and on edge, their eyes scanning the darkness with the practiced paranoia of professional security. They stepped toward the man at the pole, one of them reaching out as if to take the staple gun, to do the menial task for him. The man shoved him away. The motion was violent, abrupt, a command without words. "Leave me alone." It was the gesture of a man who was dangerously close to snapping, a man holding on to his sanity by a thread. "Who is that?" Lily whispered, her curiosity momentarily overriding the cold. "Just keep walking, Lily. Keep your head down," I instructed, my grip on her hand tightening until I feared I might hurt her. My instinct was to cross the street, to put as much distance as possible between us and whatever drama was playing out under that light. Men like that, men who had armored SUVs waiting and subordinates they could shove without consequence, brought nothing but wreckage to people like us. But the sidewalk was narrow, and a construction barrier forced us to stay on his side. There was no escape. I pulled the umbrella lower, trying to create a shield, hoping we could slip past as invisible ghosts. As we drew parallel to him, the wind gusted, a malicious breath of the city. It ripped the flyer from his wet hands. The paper tumbled through the air, dancing erratically before plastering itself against my shin. I froze. The man froze. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the relentless hiss of the rain and the thrum of the idling car. I looked down. The paper was soaked, the ink threatening to run, but the image was clear. It was a high-resolution photo, not a grainy copy. A boy with dark curls and a smile that showed a missing front tooth. Above the photo, in bold, red letters, missing, Matteo Versiani, 5 years old. Substantial reward. No questions asked. The air left my lungs. The world tilted on its axis. I knew that face. I knew the curve of that cheek, the way his eyes crinkled when he was confused. I knew it because I had spent the last 7 days wiping tears from those cheeks. I knew it because that boy was currently curled up on a mattress in my living room, clutching a stuffed bear that used to belong to my father. I reached down to peel the paper off my leg, my fingers trembling uncontrollably. When I straightened up, the man had turned. Roberto Verciani. I didn't know his name then, but I knew his face. It was the kind of face that stopped traffic. Stark, brutal angles softened only by the depth of the agony etched into his features. He was soaked to the bone, his dark hair plastered to his skull, water dripping from his jaw. But it was his eyes that pinned me to the spot. They were dark, endless pits of brown, usually likely sharp and calculating, but now they looked like shattered glass. They were red-rimmed, wild with a lack of sleep and an overdose of despair. He looked like a man who was hollowed out, standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the wind to push him over. He didn't look at me. Not really. He looked at the flyer in my hand. He looked ready to snatch it back, to staple it to the pole, to keep doing the only thing he could control in a world that had spun out of his control. I started to hand it to him, my instinct to flee warring with the sudden crushing weight of empathy. He wasn't a monster in that second. He wasn't a rich man, or a dangerous man. He was a father living his worst nightmare. Then Lily tugged on my hand. She stepped out from the shelter of the umbrella, oblivious to the rain that immediately darkened her blonde hair. She pointed a small, pale finger at the soggy piece of paper I was holding, and then she pointed at the man. "He lives in my house," she said. Her voice was clear, cutting through the noise of the storm like a bell. The world stopped. The rain seemed to pause in midair. The idling SUV engine went silent in my ears. The 2 guards by the car straightened, their hands moving inside their coats, reaching for weapons. But Roberto didn't move for a weapon. He turned to stone. He looked down at Lily, blinking as if he couldn't process the English language. His chest heaved, a ragged intake of breath that sounded like a sob trapped in a cage of ribs. He fell to his knees. He didn't lower himself gracefully. He collapsed onto the wet concrete, putting him at eye level with my 6-year-old sister. The expensive fabric of his trousers soaked up the filth of the sidewalk instantly. He didn't care. "What did you say?" His voice was a rasp, a sound of gravel grinding together. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at Lily with an intensity that would have terrified a grown man. But Lily, with the innocence of a child who had seen too much hardship to be easily rattled, just blinked. "The boy," Lily said, pointing at the paper again. "Matteo. He doesn't like thunder. He's in our house." Roberto's head snapped up to look at me. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline so potent I could almost smell it. He stood up, towering over me, the water dripping from his nose, his intensity blazing like a forest fire. "Is this true?" he demanded. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. The scent of him, expensive cologne, rain, and the metallic tang of fear, filled my senses. I gripped the umbrella handle until my knuckles turned white. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was the moment. This was the dangerous edge I had been walking for a week. I had hidden the boy because the police were corrupt, because the system was broken, because I was terrified that if I handed him over to the wrong person, he would vanish forever. But looking at this man, seeing the raw, bleeding, open wound of his grief, I knew I wasn't handing him over to the system. I was handing him to his blood. "Yes," I whispered. The word was barely audible. He grabbed my shoulders. His grip was hard, bruising, but his hands were shaking violently. "Where? Where is he? Is he alive? Is he hurt?" "He's alive," I said quickly, trying to de-escalate the violence brewing in his eyes. "He's safe. He's sleeping. Take me to him." It wasn't a request. It was a primal command. "Sir, we should call for backup," one of the guards shouted, stepping forward, his hand revealing the glint of steel beneath his coat. Roberto didn't even look back. Stay back. If you move, I will kill you myself." The threat was delivered with a cold, flat certainty that made the guard freeze instantly. Roberto looked back at me. "Take me." I nodded, unable to speak. I turned, pulling Lily back under the umbrella, and began to walk. The distance to my building was only half a block, but it felt like miles. I could hear his footsteps behind me. Heavy, urgent, splashing through the puddles. He didn't wait for his guards. He didn't check his surroundings. He was solely focused on my back, on the promise Lily had made. My mind raced. What if he thought I kidnapped him? What if he thought I was holding him for ransom? The flyer said, "No questions asked." But men like him always asked questions, and the answers were usually extracted with pain. But I couldn't run. I couldn't lie. Not with Lily there. Not with the truth waiting on my living room floor. We reached the front door of my building. It was a crumbling brownstone, the paint peeling, the buzzer system broken for years. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers slippery with rain and nerves. The key stuck in the lock. It always did. You had to jiggle it to the left, then push. "Open it!" Roberto growled from behind me. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I'm trying," I snapped, panic making my voice sharp. "It sticks." He reached over, his large hand covering mine. For a second, his skin was warm against my freezing fingers. He didn't shove me aside. He steadied my hand. He turned the key with precise, controlled force. The lock clicked. He pushed the door open and held it, ushering us inside. The lobby smelled of old cooking oil and damp carpet. The fluorescent light overhead flickered with a maddening buzz. "Basement apartment," I said, leading the way down the narrow, scuffed stairs. He followed, his breathing loud in the confined space. Every step he took seemed to echo with the weight of his authority. I was bringing a wolf into our den, but I prayed he wouldn't bite the hand that had fed his cub. I unlocked my apartment door. It was the only lock in the building I had paid to replace with a deadbolt, spending money I didn't have to ensure we were safe at night. I pushed the door open and stepped aside, pressing my back against the frame to let him pass. The apartment was small. One main room that served as a living area and bedroom for the kids, a tiny kitchenette in the corner, and a bathroom the size of a closet. It was poor. The furniture was mismatched, salvaged from curbsides, and the rug was threadbare, but it was clean. It smelled of the tomato soup I had made before leaving for work, which I had left in the slow cooker to keep warm. Roberto stepped over the threshold. He stopped. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the cracks in the ceiling or the water stains on the walls. His gaze went straight to the corner of the room. There, on a mattress I had pulled onto the floor because he was afraid of falling out of the sofa, lay Mateo. He was curled into a ball, his breathing soft and rhythmic. He was wearing one of Lily's old oversized t-shirts with a faded cartoon cat on it. His thumb was near his mouth, and his other hand was clutching the worn-out velvet ear of Mr. Bear. He looked small, fragile, and completely peaceful. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy, thick with the kind of emotion that makes the air hard to breathe. Roberto made a sound that I will never forget. It was a whimper, a high, broken noise that had no business coming from the throat of a man who looked like he could crush a skull with his bare hands. It was the sound of a soul being stitched back together. He moved across the room like a man walking in a dream, terrified that any sudden movement would wake him up and shatter the illusion. He approached the mattress. He didn't touch the boy immediately. He hovered, his hands trembling in the air, tracing the outline of Mateo's body without making contact, as if verifying that he was real, that he was solid. Then, slowly, agonizingly, Roberto sank to the floor. He ignored the dampness of his suit, the hard linoleum. He didn't care about dignity or power. He fell to his knees beside the mattress. He reached out and brushed a lock of hair off Mateo's forehead. His hand, so large it could encompass the boy's entire head, was incredibly gentle. "Mateo," he whispered. "Mateo." The name hung in the air. A prayer answered. He bowed his head, his forehead resting on the edge of the mattress, his shoulders beginning to shake. The man who had terrified the guards outside, the man who commanded respect and fear, was gone. In his place was just a father, who had found the only thing that mattered. The silence that followed Roberto Verciani's breakdown was heavier than the storm raging outside. It was a thick, suffocating blanket that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the tiny basement apartment. For a long time, the only sound was the ragged breathing of a man pulling himself back together, piece by fractured piece. I watched from the doorway, my hand still gripping Lily's shoulder so hard I forced myself to relax my fingers. The tableau before me was something out of a Renaissance painting. The dark, powerful figure bowed over the innocent, bathed in the harsh, flickering light of the single overhead bulb. But paintings were static. This was volatile. This was a bomb that had just been diffused, and I had no idea if the timer had actually stopped or just reset. Roberto moved. The transformation was terrifying to witness. One moment, he was a father shattered by relief, his forehead resting on the dirty mattress, his expensive suit ruined by the grime of my floor. The next, he was rising. It wasn't a clumsy struggle to stand. It was a fluid, predatory ascent. He didn't wipe his face with the back of his hand like a normal person would. He simply inhaled, a long, controlled breath through his nose, and the grief evaporated. In its place, something cold and metallic slammed into existence. The vulnerability was locked away behind a wall of impenetrable steel. He adjusted his cufflinks, a reflexive, almost mechanical gesture, and when he turned to face me, the eyes that met mine weren't the tear-filled eyes of a parent anymore. They were the dry, burning eyes of a man who ruled a kingdom built on violence. He didn't speak immediately. He just looked at me. He looked at the water dripping from the hem of my coat. He looked at the worn-out sneakers on my feet. He looked at the way I had positioned myself slightly in front of Lily, a subconscious shield. He was dissecting me, peeling back layers of intent and history with a single sweep of his gaze. "Lock the door," he said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of the emotion that had cracked it open minutes ago. I hesitated. "The lock is flimsy. If you want to leave..." I said lock it. I turned and threw the deadbolt. My hands were shaking, the metal feeling freezing against my skin. When I turned back, he had moved. He was no longer by the mattress. He was standing in the center of the room, dominating the small space. The ceiling was low, and he seemed to scrape against it, a giant trapped in a dollhouse. "How long?" he asked. "I told you," I managed to say, my voice steady, despite the flutter of terror in my throat. 7 days. 7 days, he repeated. The words were flat, hard stones. 7 days my son has been missing. 7 days I have torn this city apart. I have burned down warehouses. I have broken fingers. I have not slept. I have not eaten. He took a step toward me. And for 7 days, he has been sleeping on a mattress in a basement. He was safe, I said quickly. Safe? He laughed, but it was a dark, mirthless sound that made the hair on my arm stand up. You live in a neighborhood where gunshots are background noise. You have a door that could be kicked in by a teenager. You call this safe? I kept him alive. The anger flared in me, sudden and hot, overriding the fear. I wasn't going to let him stand there and judge the sanctuary I had scraped together. I fed him. I watched him every second I wasn't working. I paid a neighbor I trust to sit with him when I had to leave. I did the best I could. Why didn't you call the police? The question was a whip crack. It was the accusation I had been dreading, the logical question that made me look like a criminal. I couldn't, I said. Couldn't? He stepped closer, invading my personal space. The scent of him, rain, expensive leather, and the sharp tang of ozone was overwhelming. There is a phone on the wall. There are payphones on every corner. You could have walked into a precinct. Unless, his eyes narrowed, dark pits of suspicion. Unless you wanted something. Unless you were waiting for the reward to get higher. No. The denial tore out of my throat. Lily flinched behind me, and I reached back to squeeze her hand. I didn't want your money. I didn't even know who you were until tonight. Then why? He roared the word, his control slipping just enough to show the magma beneath the rock. Why did you keep a 5-year-old boy from his father? I took a deep breath, trying to slow my racing heart. I needed him to hear me. I needed him to understand, not just listen. I found him a week ago. I began, my voice trembling but gaining strength as I spoke. I was taking out the trash behind the hotel. It was freezing, just like tonight. I heard a noise in the dumpster. I thought it was a stray cat. Roberto's jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. He was listening, intently, analyzing every syllable for a lie. He was buried under cardboard boxes, I continued, the memory washing over me, the smell of rotting vegetables, the small shivering shape. He was curled up so tight he looked like a ball. He was wearing that suit he has on now, but it was covered in mud. When I tried to touch him, he screamed. No sound came out but his face. It was a scream. I looked over at Mateo, who was watching us from the mattress, his eyes wide and unblinking. He wasn't asleep anymore. He was witnessing his rescue, silent as a ghost. I managed to get him out, I said, turning back to Roberto. I brought him into the kitchen to warm him up. My manager wasn't there. I gave him some hot milk. I was going to call 911. That was the first thing I thought of. Obviously. But if the first police car on the scene belonged to the same people who had put him in that dumpster, then every number I could dial was just another way of leading them back to him. So why didn't you? Roberto demanded. Because a patrol car pulled into the alley, I said. Roberto went still. Absolutely still. They were on a break, I said. 2 officers, uniforms, badges, guns. They got out to smoke. Mateo saw them through the service window. I paused, remembering the terror that had seized the boy. It hadn't been normal fear. It had been a primal, animalistic panic. He went crazy, I whispered. He started clawing at the walls. He was trying to hide under the industrial sink. He was pointing at them and shaking his head. He found his voice for 1 second. Just 1 second. He pointed at the police officer, a man with a mustache, badge number 492. I remember it because I stared at it. And he said, "Bad man." He said, "them." Roberto didn't breathe. He didn't blink. He was a statue carved from ice. He pointed at the police, Roberto said, his voice dangerously quiet. He pointed at the uniform, I corrected. He was terrified of the uniform. He made it very clear that the men in blue were the ones who took him, or the ones who gave him to whoever took him. I took a step closer to Roberto, desperate for him to believe me. If I had called 911, they would have sent a patrol car. Maybe those same men, maybe their friends. I couldn't take that risk. I looked at that little boy, shaking on the floor, and I knew that if I put him in the system, he would disappear, this time for good. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. Roberto looked at me, searching for deception. He looked for the telltale signs of a lie. The shifting eyes, the fidgeting hands. But I had nothing to hide. I had spent a week terrified that I was making the wrong choice. But looking at his face now, I knew I hadn't. Badge number 492. Roberto repeated softly. Yes, I said. Officer, distinct scar on his chin. Roberto closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them, the suspicion was gone, replaced by a cold, deadly realization, a fury that wasn't directed at me, but at something invisible to my eyes. Detective Miller, he murmured. He was on my payroll. He was at my house for Christmas last year. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. The betrayal, the rot inside his own fortress. You didn't call the police, Roberto said, his voice sounding distant. Because the police were the ones who sold him. I didn't know that for sure, I admitted. But I couldn't gamble with his life, so I brought him here. It was the only place nobody would look. Who looks for a billionaire's son in a basement apartment on 4th Street? Roberto looked around the room again. This time, he didn't look with judgment. He looked with clarity. He saw the blockade I had built at the door each night, a heavy wooden chair wedged under the handle. He saw the coloring books I had bought from the dollar store. He saw the slow cooker bubbling in the corner. He walked over to the kitchen counter. He picked up a box of cereal. It was a generic brand, the cheapest one available. He looked at the price sticker still on the top. Then he looked at the empty shelves. He realized that I had fed his son before I fed myself. He realized that the circles under my eyes were there because I had stayed awake watching the door while his son slept. He turned back to me. The menace had receded, leaving behind a profound, unsettling intensity. You have nothing, he stated. It wasn't an insult. It was an observation. I have enough, I countered defensively. No, he shook his head. You have nothing. And yet, you gave him everything you had. He walked toward me again, stopping just inches away. He looked down at me, his dark eyes scanning my face as if memorizing my features for a file. Do you know who I am, Maria? I know you're his father, I said. And I know you're dangerous. I am Roberto Verziani, he said. The name carried weight, heavy and dark. I run this city. Or I thought I did. Until tonight I thought I saw everything. But I didn't see the snakes in my own garden. He reached out. For a second, I thought he was going to strike me. I flinched, but his hand bypassed me and landed on Lily's head. He smoothed her wet hair, a gesture strangely tender for a man discussing betrayal and murder. You saved my life, he said. Not just his. Mine. Because if I had lost him, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The abyss that opened up in his eyes said enough. He pulled his hand back and reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a sleek black smartphone. He didn't dial a number. He pressed a single button on the side. It's me, he said into the device. His voice was commanding, absolute. I have him. A pause. Someone on the other end was shouting, likely asking questions. Silence, Roberto ordered. I said I have him. He is unharmed. Listen to me very carefully, Marco. Do not use the main frequency. Our communications are compromised. Miller is a traitor. Anyone associated with the 9th Precinct is suspect. I watched him, fascinated and terrified. He was flipping a switch, turning from a grieving father into a warlord. Bring the extraction team, he continued. But do not bring them to the main entrance. Park on the parallel street. Come through the alley. I want a ghost extraction. No sirens, no lights. He paused again, listening. Then he looked at me. Address? He asked. 412 Oak Street, apartment 1B, I whispered. 412 Oak Street. He repeated into the phone. We are burning this location. My head snapped up. What? Roberto ignored me. 5 minutes, Marco. If you are late, don't bother coming at all. He hung up the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. The air in the room had shifted again. It was no longer a confession booth. It was a staging ground. What do you mean, burning this location? I asked, panic rising in my chest. This is my home. Not anymore, Roberto said. He walked over to the window, peering through the cracks in the blinds, checking the street level. You think Miller acted alone? You think a detective snatches a mafia don's son without backing? The O'Sullivans are behind this. And if Miller knows where to look, if anyone saw you, he turned to face me. They will come here. They will come to tie up loose ends. You are a loose end, Maria. I can just leave for a few days, I stammered. I can go to a motel. A motel? He looked at me as if I were a child proposing to fight a tank with a stick. If they find you, they won't just kill you. They will torture you to find out what you told me. They will use you to get to me again. And they will go through her to do it. He pointed at Lily. The blood drained from my face. I looked at my sister. She was watching Roberto with wide, trusting eyes, completely unaware that he had just outlined her potential demise. So what happens? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You come with me, Roberto said. It wasn't an offer. It wasn't a question. It was a decree. I can't just go with you, I argued, though the fight was leaving me. I have a job. I have bills. I have a life here. You have a job scrubbing toilets and washing dishes, he said brutally. You have bills you can't pay, and your life here ended the moment you picked up my son from that dumpster. He walked over to me, grabbing my upper arms. His grip was firm, grounding. He forced me to look at him. You protected what is mine, he said, intense, dark eyes boring into my soul. Now, I protect what is yours. That is the law. My law. I don't know your laws, I whispered. You will learn them, he said. Pack a bag. Essentials only. You have 3 minutes. I stared at him. I wanted to tell him to go to hell. I wanted to tell him to get out of my apartment and take his danger with him. But then I looked at Mateo. He had crawled off the mattress and was standing next to Roberto's leg, clutching the fabric of his trousers. He looked at me. And then he looked at Lily. He reached out and took Lily's hand. The two children stood there, hand in hand, united by the strange, silent bond of childhood. If I stayed here, I was dead. Roberto was right. I knew enough about the way the world worked to know that witnesses to this kind of power struggle didn't retire to Florida. They disappeared into the Hudson River. 3 minutes, I said, pulling away from his grip. I grabbed the duffel bag from under the bed, the one I kept ready for emergencies, though usually the emergency was a landlord eviction, not a mob war. I moved with frantic haste. I threw in Lily's favorite sweater, the one with the hole in the elbow. I grabbed my toothbrush. I grabbed the small wooden box that held my mother's necklace and my birth certificate. Roberto stood by the door, his gun drawn now. He wasn't looking at us. He was watching the hallway, his body angled to shield the room. He was a sentinel, a monster, standing guard over his treasure. "Maria?" Lily asked, her voice trembling slightly as she saw me frantically stuffing clothes into the bag. "Are we going on a trip?" I paused, holding a pair of socks in my hand. I looked at the damp walls of the apartment that had been our prison and our sanctuary. I looked at the man who had brought the storm inside. "Yes, Bug," I said, forcing a smile onto my face. "We're going on a trip." "Where?" I looked at Roberto. He turned his head slightly, catching my gaze. There was no softness in his face, but there was something else. A promise. A vow written in blood and rain. "Somewhere safe," I said. "Time is up," Roberto announced. He holstered his weapon but kept his hand near it. He scooped Mateo up in one arm, the boy settling against his hip as if he belonged there. With his other hand, he reached out and opened the door. "Stay behind me," he ordered. "Do not stop walking. If I say down, you drop to the floor. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said, hoisting the bag onto my shoulder and grabbing Lily's hand. We stepped out into the hallway. It smelled of cabbage and stale smoke, same as always. But it felt different now. It felt like a tunnel leading to another world. I was walking away from the only life I knew, stepping into the dark shadow of a man I shouldn't trust, but who was currently the only barrier between us and death. As we reached the stairs, Roberto paused. He looked back at me one last time. "You did good, Maria," he said. The words were quiet, almost lost in the creak of the floorboards. It was the first time anyone had told me that in years. "Let's go," he said, and we walked up the stairs, leaving the basement behind, heading toward the waiting night. The rain had stopped, but the storm was just beginning. The ride to the safe house was a blur of motion and silence, punctuated only by the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers against bulletproof glass. I sat in the back of the massive black SUV, squeezed between Lily and the door, while Roberto sat opposite us, Mateo asleep against his chest. The interior smelled of new leather and the sharp metallic scent of the rain that clung to our clothes. We didn't go to the Vertiani estate. I knew enough from the tabloids and the whispers in the city that the family compound was in Long Island, a fortress of old money and older secrets. Instead, the convoy of 3 cars cut through the slick streets of Manhattan, heading toward the skyline that pierced the low-hanging clouds. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the pressurized cabin. Roberto didn't open his eyes. His hand was resting protectively over Mateo's ear, shielding him from the hum of the road. A ghost location. Not on any deed, not in any database. If we want to stay alive tonight, we need to be invisible. Invisible. I had spent my whole life being invisible. The maid who cleaned the room while the guests ignored her. The waitress who refilled the coffee, while the businessmen argued. But this was a different kind of invisibility. This was erasure. The cars pulled into the underground garage of a glass needle of a building in Tribeca. Security was tight, brutal, and efficient. Men with earpieces and assault rifles that looked terrifyingly modern swarmed the vehicle before the doors even unlocked. Roberto stepped out first, shielding Mateo with his body, his eyes scanning the concrete shadows with predatory intensity. "Move," he ordered, extending a hand to help Lily out. We were ushered into a private elevator that had no buttons, only a biometric scanner. Roberto pressed his palm against the panel. A green light scanned his retina. The doors hissed shut, sealing us in a steel box that shot upward with stomach-churning speed. When the doors opened, we weren't in a home. We were in a fortress in the sky. The penthouse was vast, spanning the entire top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the drowning city. But there was no warmth here. The furniture was sleek, Italian, and uncomfortable-looking. The surfaces were polished marble and chrome. It looked like a showroom, or a high-end medical facility, devoid of personal touches. No photos, no clutter, no life. "Check the perimeter," Roberto barked at Marco, the head of his security detail, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk. "I want the blast shields engaged on the windows. Nothing comes in, nothing goes out." "Yes, boss." I held Lily's hand tight as metal shutters began to descend over the magnificent view, turning the penthouse into a luxury bunker. The sound of the locks engaging, heavy, industrial thuds, echoed in the large space. "Put the boy in the master suite," Roberto instructed a younger guard. But then he stopped himself. He looked down at Matteo, who was beginning to stir, his eyes fluttering open in panic as he realized he was in a strange place. Matteo let out a silent cry, his small hands grasping at the air. "I'll take him," I said, stepping forward before I could think about the hierarchy in the room. Roberto looked at me. For a second, I thought he would snap at me for interrupting. But he saw the way Matteo was reaching for me. Not for his father, but for the woman who had fed him soup for a week. A flash of pain crossed Roberto's face, raw and unguarded, before he masked it. "Go," he said. "Second door on the right." I led the children into the bedroom. It was bigger than my entire apartment. The bed was a king-sized expanse of white linens that probably cost more than my father's truck. I sat Matteo down in the center of it. He immediately curled up into a ball, pulling his knees to his chest. Lily climbed up beside him, patting his arm. "It's okay, Leo," she whispered, using the name we had called him. "It's like a spaceship." I spent the next hour trying to turn the sterile room into something resembling a sanctuary. I found extra pillows in the closet and built a fort, just like we did in the basement. I closed the heavy curtains to hide the blast shields. I kept the lights low. But the real problem started when the food arrived. Roberto entered the room an hour later, followed by a man pushing a cart laden with silver platters. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the air, rich and mouth-watering. My stomach rumbled audibly. I hadn't eaten since lunch, but I ignored it. "Dinner," Roberto announced. He had changed out of his wetsuit into a black t-shirt and dark jeans. Without the armor of the tailored jacket, he looked even more dangerous. The muscles in his arms shifted as he crossed them over his chest. "He needs to eat." The staff member placed a plate of perfectly cut chicken and steamed vegetables in front of Matteo. Matteo looked at the food. Then he looked at the man who brought it. Then he looked at Roberto. He pushed the plate away, shaking his head violently. He squeezed his eyes shut and clamped his mouth closed. "Matteo, eat," Roberto said, his voice gentle but firm. "It is from Nonna's recipe. You love this." It was his grandmother's recipe, nonna, a word that wrapped the food in something almost sacred. Matteo refused. He was trembling. "He won't eat it," I said quietly from the edge of the bed where I was sitting with Lily. Roberto turned to me, his patience fraying. "He is starving. He has to eat. He thinks it's poisoned," I explained. "The men who took him, they must have given him something, or threatened him with food. For the first 2 days at my place, he wouldn't touch anything unless I took a bite first, and swallowed it in front of him." Roberto's face darkened, a storm cloud passing over his features as he imagined what his son had endured. He looked at the plate, then at his son, helpless in the face of the trauma. I stood up. I walked over to the cart and picked up a fork. I didn't ask for permission. I speared a piece of chicken and a carrot. I knelt down in front of Matteo, making sure I was at his eye level. "Look, Matteo," I said softly. I put the food in my mouth. I chewed slowly, exaggerating the motion. I swallowed. I opened my mouth to show him it was gone. I smiled. "See? Good. Safe." I waited 5 seconds. 10. Matteo watched me with intense focus. He watched my throat. He watched my eyes to see if I would fall over. When I remained upright and smiling, his shoulders dropped about an inch. He reached out a hesitant hand. I handed him the fork. He took it and took a tiny bite. Then another. Soon he was eating with the ravenous hunger of a growing boy. I felt a gaze burning into the side of my face. I turned to find Roberto watching me. He wasn't looking at the food. He was looking at me with an expression that was a terrifying mixture of awe and calculation. He was realizing that I held the key to his son's recovery, a key he didn't possess. "You have done this before," he said quietly, stepping closer as Matteo focused on his meal. "Done what?" "Handled fear. You don't flinch when I raise my voice. You don't shake when you see guns. You knew to block the door of your apartment with a chair wedged under the handle, not just leaning against it. That is a tactical barricade, not a civilian guess." I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans. The adrenaline of the escape was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. But his scrutiny kept me sharp. "My father," I said simply. "He lived in Ohio. He wanted a son. He got me, and then, years later, Lily. He didn't believe in dolls. He believed in preparation." Roberto raised an eyebrow. "Preparation for what?" "For everything. Economic collapse, home invasion, the end of the world." I shrugged, a bitter smile touching my lips. He was paranoid. I grew up thinking the sky was falling. He taught me to shoot a rifle when I was 8. He taught me how to check for exits when I walk into a room. He taught me that if you can't be strong, you have to be smart. And where is he now? He died 3 years ago. "Heart attack," I said. "He spent his whole life preparing for a war that never came, and his own heart killed him while he was watching TV. But," I looked at Matteo, who was now sharing a piece of chicken with Lily. I guess the lessons stuck. "When I saw that cop in the alley, I didn't see a uniform. I saw a predator. My dad taught me to spot predators." Roberto stared at me for a long moment. The silence between us stretched, thick with unsaid words. He stepped closer, invading my personal space again. But this time it felt less like intimidation and more like magnetism. "You spotted a predator," he murmured, his voice low. "And you saved my bloodline because of it." His phone buzzed in his pocket, shattering the moment. He pulled it out, his eyes never leaving my face as he answered. "Speak." He listened for a moment, his jaw tightening. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Confirmed?" he asked. A pause. "Good. Deal with it." "No, not quickly. Make it last." He hung up and looked at me. "You were right." "About what?" "Detective Miller. Badge 492. Roberto walked over to the window, staring at the metal shutters as if he could see through them to the city below. My men swept his financials. He received a deposit into an offshore account 3 days before Matteo was taken. A deposit from a shell company linked to the O'Sullivan family. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I knew it. I knew he looked wrong. "You have excellent instincts, Maria Foster," Roberto said, turning back to face me. "Better than half the men on my payroll." He walked over to the wet bar in the corner of the room and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He held one out to me. "I don't drink," I said automatically. "It's for the nerves. Drink," he ordered, but the edge was gone from his voice. I took the glass. The crystal was heavy, cold in my hand. I took a small sip. The whiskey burned on the way down, a fire that matched the one in his eyes. "So, what happens now?" I asked, looking at the children. Lily had fallen asleep next to Matteo, her head on his shoulder. "You have your son. You know who the traitor is. The O'Sullivans. They'll know you have him back soon. They already know," Roberto said grimly. "The moment I extracted you, the clock started ticking. War is coming, Maria. A war that will make the storm outside look like a gentle breeze." "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "So give us some money, enough to get a bus ticket to somewhere far away, Idaho or Montana. Nobody will look for us there. We'll disappear. You'll never see us again." Roberto swirled the whiskey in his glass, watching the amber vortex. "Is that what you want? To disappear? I want my sister to be safe," I said fiercely. "That's all I want. And you think you can keep her safe? He looked at me, his gaze piercing. You have no money. You have no resources. And now, you have a connection to the Versiani family. The O'Sullivans are not the kind of men who forgive. They will assume you know things. They will assume you saw faces. They will hunt you down, Maria. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But one day, you will be walking Lily to school, and a van will pull up, and you will never be seen again. The horror of his words washed over me. I felt bile rise in my throat. You're trying to scare me. I am trying to save you, he countered. Again, he set his glass down on the marble table with a sharp click. You cannot leave. Not yet. I'm not your prisoner, I said, though I felt like one, a prisoner in a gilded cage. No, you are my guest, he said. But look at him. He pointed to the bed. Matteo was asleep now, but his hand was reaching out, clutching the hem of Lily's sweater. He trusts you, Roberto said, his voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a confession. He won't eat for me. He won't speak to me. He looks at me, and he sees the man who failed to protect him. But he looks at you, and he sees safety. He walked over to me, stopping so close that I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. I had to tilt my head back to look him in the eyes. I can buy armies, Maria, he said. I can buy politicians. I can buy silence. But I cannot buy trust. And I certainly cannot buy the way that boy looks at you. I'm a chambermaid, I whispered. I'm nobody. You are the woman who brought my son back from the dead. He corrected. You are not nobody. Not anymore. He reached out and for the first time touched me. His fingers grazed my chin, tilting my face up toward the light. His skin was rough, calloused, the hands of a man who did his own dirty work. The touch sent a shockwave through my nervous system, a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the man standing in front of me. You stay, he said. You stay here, under my protection. You watch over him while I deal with the O'Sullivans. You ensure he eats. You ensure he sleeps. And in return, I breathed. In return, I give you the world, he said. I will set up a trust for your sister. She will go to the best schools. She will never know hunger or cold again. You will never scrub another toilet. You will be comfortable. I don't want comfort, I said, pulling away from his touch, though my skin burned where his fingers had been. I want freedom. Freedom is an illusion, Roberto said darkly. Safety is the only reality that matters. And right now, the only safety you have is inside these walls. He stepped back, the distance between us suddenly feeling vast. The guest room is down the hall for you and the girl, he said, his businesslike demeanor returning. But tonight, stay with him. If he wakes up and you are gone, he will panic. I wasn't planning on leaving him, I said. Good. He walked toward the door. He paused with his hand on the biometric scanner. He didn't look back. Get some sleep, Maria. You look like you've been fighting a war. Maybe I have, I murmured. Then rest, he said. Because the next battle starts at sunrise. The door hissed shut behind him, locking with that heavy final thud. I let out a shuddering breath and sank onto the edge of the massive bed. I looked at the 3 sleeping children, Matteo, Lily, and the ghost of the girl I used to be before tonight. I picked up the glass of whiskey he had left. I took another sip. It tasted like smoke and power. I was trapped. I knew it. He had woven a web of logic and fear that I couldn't cut through. But as I looked at Matteo's peaceful face, I realized that even if the doors were unlocked, I couldn't walk out. My father had taught me to survive, but he hadn't taught me how to walk away from a child who needed me. I kicked off my wet sneakers and curled up at the foot of the bed, positioning myself between the children and the door. My hand drifted under the pillow, fingers curling around the cold, hard shape of the heavy brass lamp I had unscrewed from the nightstand while Roberto was talking. It wasn't a gun, but it was a weapon. Roberto Verciani might think I was just a guest, or a nanny, or a loose end, but he was wrong. I was the daughter of a paranoid hunter from Ohio, and if anyone, O'Sullivan or Verciani, tried to hurt these kids, they would find out that I didn't need a fortress to be dangerous. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind howl against the blast shields, and waited for the dawn. The morning sun tried to pierce through the heavy blast shields covering the penthouse windows, but it only managed to cast a dull gray light across the expanse of the main room. The fortress in the sky was silent, save for the hum of the air filtration system and the low murmur of men strategizing in the corner. I sat on the edge of the massive white sofa, holding a cup of coffee that was growing cold in my hands. My eyes were gritty with lack of sleep. I hadn't really slept. I had just hovered in a state of hyper-aware exhaustion, listening for the sound of a door opening or a footstep that didn't belong. In the bedroom, Matteo and Lily were watching cartoons on a television screen the size of a movie theater. They were safe for now, insulated by soundproof walls and Roberto's promise. But out here, in the cold marble reality of the war room, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Roberto stood by the wet bar, which had been converted into a command center. Maps of the city were spread out over the granite counter, weighed down by clips of ammunition and heavy crystal tumblers. He was on the phone again, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. He looked different in the daylight. Last night, he had been a force of nature, a creature of rain and violence. Today, he was a CEO of death. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle, and a watch that probably cost more than the building I used to live in. His dark brown eyes, intense, calculating, devoid of the tears I had seen yesterday, scanned a document one of his guards had handed him. "No," Roberto said into the phone, his tone cutting. "I don't care about the optics. I care about the leak. Find it. Plug it. Or I will bury everyone involved." He hung up and rubbed his face with one hand. The exhaustion was there, buried deep beneath the layer of iron will, but he wore it like armor. He looked up and caught me watching him. The mask didn't slip, but his gaze softened just a fraction. He walked over to me, ignoring the two guards, Marco and a new one named Lucas, who were pretending not to listen. "Did they eat?" he asked. "Matteo ate 2 bowls of cereal," I reported. "Lily is trying to teach him sign language for more sugar." A ghost of a smile touched Roberto's lips before vanishing. "Good. You are good with him, Maria. Better than the expensive therapists I hired last year." "I'm not a therapist," I said, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. "I'm just someone who knows what it's like to be scared of the people who are supposed to protect you." Roberto's expression tightened. He reached out, his hand hovering near my shoulder before dropping to his side. "I received intelligence an hour ago. We know where the leak came from, and we know where the payment was authorized." "The O'Sullivans?" "The O'Sullivans are the bank," he corrected. "But the broker, the man who arranged the kidnapping, the man who bridged the gap between my organization and their money, is someone else, a middleman. And he is going to be in public tonight. So you go get him," I said. It sounded simple in my head. He was the wolf. He should just go hunt. "It is not that simple," Roberto sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "It is the Children's Hospital Charity Gala. The mayor will be there. The police commissioner, the one who isn't dirty, supposedly, will be there. The press will be swarming. I cannot just walk in and put a bullet in his head. I need to confirm his identity, intercept him, and extract him without causing a panic that brings the National Guard down on my neck." "Okay," I said slowly. "So you go to the party. You smile. You shake hands. You grab the bad guy." "I am going." He nodded. Then he looked at me, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach flip. "And you are coming with me." I almost choked on my coffee. "Excuse me? You are coming with me," he repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Absolutely not." I stood up, setting the cup down with a clatter. "I am not going to some fancy gala. I don't belong there. I don't have a dress. I don't know which fork to use. And most importantly, I am not leaving those children. The children will be locked in the panic room," Roberto said calmly. "It is a vault behind the master bedroom closet. It has its own air supply, reinforced steel walls, and a biometric lock that only I can open. Marco will stand guard outside it. It is the safest place on Earth. Then I'll stay in the panic room with them, I countered, crossing my arms. Roberto stepped closer, invading my personal space until all I could see were his dark eyes. No, you cannot stay here. Why? You said it's a fortress. It is, he admitted. But I still do not know who the traitor is inside my own house. Marco is loyal. I would bet my life on it. But the others? The night shift? The perimeter team? He shook his head. If I leave you here, and the leak comes from the security detail, you are a sitting duck. They know you are the witness. They know you can identify the corrupt cop. If they can't get to Matteo in the vault, they will take you. They will use you to force me to open the door. The blood drained from my face. Oh, I cannot focus on the mission if I am wondering if my own guards are selling you out, Roberto said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. I need you where I can see you. I need you in my line of sight. So I'm a liability, I said bitterly. No, he said sharply. You are a strategic asset. Rumors are already spreading that I am weak, that I am grieving, that my son is gone. If I walk into that gala alone, looking like a man hunting for ghosts, I look desperate. But if I walk in with a beautiful woman on my arm, if I look like a man who has everything under control, it confuses them. It makes the traitor nervous. It forces him to make a mistake. I'm not a beautiful woman, I argued, gesturing to my stained jeans and the oversized t-shirt I had borrowed from his closet. I'm a chambermaid, Roberto. I clean up after the people who go to these parties. I don't join them. Roberto looked me up and down. The gaze wasn't leering. It was assessing, like a sculptor looking at a block of marble, knowing exactly what was hidden inside. You are not a maid, he said softly. You are the woman who stared down a wolf and didn't blink. And tonight, you are going to be the Queen of New York. He turned to Marco. Bring the package. Marco nodded and disappeared into the hallway, returning a moment later with a long black garment bag and a sleek shoebox. He hung the bag on the door of the coat closet. I had a stylist pull options based on your measurements, Roberto said, clearing his throat slightly. This one is the best tactical choice. Dark, elegant, not easily forgotten. Tactical choice? I raised an eyebrow. It's a dress, not a Kevlar vest. In my world, Maria, appearance is the strongest armor you can wear. He checked his watch. You have 2 hours. A hair and makeup team is waiting in the guest bath. They have signed NDAs that would cost them their lives if they speak. Use them. And if I say no? Roberto stepped in close again. He didn't touch me, but the air between us crackled with electricity. You won't. Because you know I am right. You know that the safest place for you right now is not behind a locked door, but standing next to the monster who holds the key. He was arrogant. He was infuriating. And he was right. I snatched the garment bag. 2 hours. But if I trip in high heels and embarrass you in front of the mayor, that's on you. A smirk played on his lips. A dangerous, devastating thing. I will catch you. 2 hours later, I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. The team Roberto had hired were magicians. They had taken my limp, dishwater blonde hair and blown it out into sleek, honey gold waves that cascaded down my back like liquid silk. They had covered the dark circles under my eyes, highlighted my cheekbones, and painted my lips a deep, bruised berry color. But it was the dress that transformed me. It was silk, the color of a deep, rich burgundy wine. Bordeaux, the stylist had called it. It had long sleeves, which I was grateful for, but the back was completely open, plunging down to the base of my spine. It fit like a second skin, hugging every curve I usually tried to hide under baggy uniforms. It was modest in the front, high-necked and severe, but the way the silk moved against my body made me feel naked and armored all at once. I stepped into the black stilettos, taking a moment to find my balance. I was used to rubber-soled sneakers, to rushing across slick kitchen tiles. These shoes forced me to move slower, with more intention. I walked out into the main room. The sun had set, and the penthouse was bathed in the artificial glow of the city lights filtering through the now open blast shields. Roberto was standing by the window, adjusting the cuffs of his tuxedo. He looked like James Bond's darker, deadlier brother. The tuxedo was midnight blue, almost black, tailored to perfection. He heard my heels clicking on the marble floor. He turned. He stopped, his hands stilled on his cuffs. He didn't say anything. He just looked. His eyes started at my feet and traveled up, slowly, lingering on the sway of the silk, the curve of my waist, the exposed skin of my back, as I turned slightly to check for Lily. When his gaze finally met mine, there was a fire in them that had nothing to do with anger. It was raw, masculine appreciation. It was a look of possession. "Maria," he breathed. The name sounded different when he said it like that. Like a prayer. "It fits," I said, feeling suddenly shy, smoothing the fabric over my hips. "It is." He shook his head, seeming to struggle for the English word. "Devastating." "You look dangerous." "Good," I said, lifting my chin. "I feel dangerous." He walked over to me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. He flipped it open. Inside sat a diamond necklace, a simple solitaire on a delicate platinum chain. "Turn around," he ordered softly. I turned, exposing my back to him. I felt the heat of his body behind me. I felt his fingers brush the nape of my neck as he lifted my hair. The metal of the chain was cool against my skin, but his fingertips were scorching hot. He took his time fastening the clasp. His breath ghosted over my shoulder, sending shivers racing down my spine. "This is a tracker," he whispered into my ear. "It has a GPS chip embedded in the setting. If we get separated, if anyone takes you, I will find you. Anywhere on this planet." The romance of the moment shattered, replaced by the cold reality of our situation. But strangely, I found it comforting. It wasn't jewelry. It was a leash. And right now, I wanted to be tethered to the biggest dog in the fight. "Understood," I whispered back. He turned me around to face him. His hands settled on my waist. The fabric of the dress was thin. I could feel the heat of his palms burning through it. "We are going into a tank of sharks," he told me, his face serious. "Do not speak to the press. Do not accept drinks from anyone but me. Stay on my left side. My gun is on my right. I need that arm free. If I squeeze your waist twice, you move. Immediately. I know how to be invisible, Roberto," I reminded him. "I've served these people champagne while they talked about their affairs and their crimes. They don't look at the help. They won't look at me." Roberto let out a short, dry laugh. He leaned in, his lips brushing my ear. "You are not the help tonight, Maria. Look in the mirror. No one is going to be able to look away from you. Especially not me." He stepped back, offering me his arm. "Ready?" I took a deep breath, thinking of Matteo safe in the vault, thinking of the badge number 492, thinking of the life I was leaving behind. "Ready," I said. The charity gala was held at the Pierre Hotel. The ballroom was a sea of black ties, glittering jewels, and fake smiles. The air smelled of expensive perfume, lilies, and ambition. A string quartet was playing something classical and soothing in the corner, trying to mask the predatory nature of the gathering. As we walked in, the room didn't go silent. That only happened in movies. But the energy shifted. Heads turned. Whispers started behind gloved hands. Roberto Verciani had arrived, 3 days after rumors of his son's kidnapping had started to circulate in the underworld, and he wasn't grieving. He was standing tall, looking lethal, with a mystery woman in blood-red silk on his arm. I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes. My instinct was to shrink, to grab a tray and start clearing glasses, to blend into the wallpaper. But Roberto's arm was a steel band under mine. He held me close, his body shielding me from the worst of the glare. "Head up," he murmured. "You belong here because I say you belong here." We moved through the crowd. Roberto played the part perfectly. He shook hands. He exchanged pleasantries with the mayor. He nodded at rival mobsters who were pretending to be legitimate businessmen for the night. He was charming, but there was an edge to it, a threat lurking beneath every smile. I played my part too. I smiled. I nodded. I sipped the champagne Roberto handed me, after he tasted it first. But while they played the social game, I went to work. I wasn't looking at the jewels or the dresses. I was looking at the staff. I knew the rhythm of a service crew. I knew the flow. The waiters moved in a pattern, clockwise, trays up, eyes down, efficient, invisible. They were tired, they were bored, they were thinking about their tips and their aching feet. But one of them was wrong. We were standing near a massive ice sculpture of a swan when I saw him. He was a waiter, young, maybe 25. He was carrying a tray of crab cakes. He was moving through the crowd near the kitchen doors. But he wasn't looking at the guests' glasses. He wasn't looking for empty plates. He was looking at the ceiling, specifically at the ventilation grates. Then he looked at the security team standing by the emergency exit, Roberto's men. He was sweating. Not the sheen of hard work in a hot kitchen, but the clammy gray sweat of terror. His hand shook slightly as he offered a napkin to a woman. I tightened my grip on Roberto's arm. "Roberto," I whispered, not moving my lips, keeping my smile plastered on my face. "Tell me." He replied instantly, his body tensing against mine. The waiter, 3 o'clock, near the kitchen swing doors. Dark hair, scar above his left eyebrow. "I see him. What about him?" "He's wearing shoes with rubber soles," I murmured. "Tactical boots disguised as dress shoes. You can see the tread when he steps. And he's not serving the food. He's been circling the same 4 tables for 10 minutes, but his tray is still full. He's timing the security rotation." Roberto didn't look directly at the man. He looked at me, looking deep into my eyes as if he wanted to kiss me, but really using the angle to check his periphery. "Rubber soles," he mused. "Good catch. He's checking his watch every 30 seconds, I added. "He's waiting for a signal." "He is the spotter," Roberto concluded. "He is waiting for the target to arrive, or he is signaling for the hit." "Who is the target?" "Me," Roberto said calmly. "Or the broker. If the O'Sullivans are cleaning house, they might be here to kill the middleman before I can get to him." Suddenly the waiter stiffened. He touched his ear. An earpiece. A tiny, flesh-colored device that I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't been looking for it. He dropped the tray of crab cakes on a nearby table with a clatter that drew annoyed looks, and turned sharply toward the service corridor. "He's moving," I said. "Stay here," Roberto ordered. "No," I said, my hand clamping onto his bicep. "If I stay here alone, I'm a target, and you need me to identify if there are others. Service crews work in teams. If there's one fake waiter, there's a busboy and a bartender too." Roberto looked at the service corridor, then back at me. He weighed the risk. "You are impossible," he growled. "I'm useful," I corrected. "Fine. Stay on my hip. If guns come out, you hit the floor. You do not try to be a hero. You survive. That is your only job. Deal." We moved. We didn't run. That would cause a scene. We glided through the crowd, cutting off the waiter's path. We slipped through the heavy velvet curtains that separated the ballroom from the service area. The noise of the party faded instantly, replaced by the clatter of dishes and the shouting of chefs. The hallway was narrow, lined with stacks of chairs and dirty linens. The waiter was there, standing by the back exit, speaking frantically into his wrist. "Target is in the open. I repeat, the broker is in the VIP lounge. He's panicking. He wants out." Roberto moved. He was a blur of motion. He crossed the distance in 2 strides. The waiter spun around, reaching under his apron. He pulled out a gun, a silenced pistol. He raised it. I didn't think. I didn't scream. I acted on pure instinct, the muscle memory of a girl who had helped her father fix trucks. I grabbed a heavy silver tray from a stack next to me and swung it with both hands like a baseball bat. Clang. The edge of the silver tray connected with the waiter's wrist. The bone crunched. The gun flew out of his hand, skittering across the tile floor. The waiter cried out, clutching his arm, but before he could recover, Roberto was on him. Roberto slammed him against the wall, his forearm pressing against the man's windpipe, cutting off his air. "Who sent you?" Roberto snarled, his face inches from the man's. The waiter gasped, his face turning purple. "Go. To hell. I am already there," Roberto whispered. "And I am the king." He shifted his weight, and the man passed out from lack of oxygen, sliding down the wall in a heap. Roberto checked the man's pulse, alive, then turned to look at me. I was standing there, chest heaving, clutching a dented silver tray. My beautiful burgundy dress was perfectly intact, but my hands were shaking. Roberto looked at the tray. Then he looked at me. His eyes were wide, dilated with adrenaline and shock. "You," he started. "He had a gun," I said breathlessly. "He was going to shoot you. You hit him with a serving tray," Roberto said. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. It wasn't the polite smile from the party. It was a wolfish grin of pure delight. "It was heavy," I defended myself, dropping the tray with a loud clatter. Roberto stepped over the unconscious body. He grabbed my face in both hands. The intensity of his touch made my knees weak. "I told you to hit the floor," he growled, but there was no anger in his voice. There was only heat. "I improvised," I whispered. "You are dangerous," he murmured, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. "My God, Maria, you are the most dangerous thing in this room." He leaned in. I thought he was going to kiss me. I wanted him to kiss me. The adrenaline was pounding in my veins, demanding release. But then his earpiece buzzed. He pulled back, his face hardening instantly. He touched his ear. "Report," he barked. He listened. His eyes darkened. "The broker is in the VIP lounge," he said to me. "But we have a problem. The O'Sullivans aren't just here to kill him. They rigged the exits. They are going to burn the building down to cover their tracks." My heart stopped. "Fire? We need to get the broker," Roberto said, grabbing my hand. "And then we need to get out. Now." He pulled me down the hallway, deeper into the bowels of the hotel. I ran in my heels, the silk of my dress swishing around my legs, the diamond tracker cold against my neck. I wasn't a waitress anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was the woman running into the fire with the devil himself. And God help me. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The air in the service corridor shifted instantly. It wasn't just the smell of stale cooking oil and cleaning chemicals anymore. There was a new, sharper scent threading through the atmosphere. Smoke. Acrid, burning plastic and scorching drywall. "Move," Roberto commanded, his hand clamping around my wrist like a vice. He didn't pull me. He anchored me, his stride eating up the distance of the hallway while I struggled to keep pace in my stilettos. "The fire," I choked out, the panic I had suppressed during the confrontation with the waiter bubbling up again. "They really said it. Distraction," Roberto growled, not looking back. "They don't want to burn the people. They want to flush them out. Chaos is the best cover for an assassination. If the broker runs out the front door with the rest of the sheep, he's dead. A sniper is probably sitting on a rooftop across Fifth Avenue right now, waiting for a clear shot." We burst through the double doors at the end of the corridor, emerging into a backstage area of the VIP lounge. The music from the ballroom was muffled here, replaced by the frantic shouting of hotel staff who were just realizing that the alarms were about to scream. The VIP lounge was a circle of velvet chairs and mahogany tables, populated by men who thought they owned the world, and women who were paid to agree with them. But the atmosphere had curdled. The smoke was visible here, curling under the doorframe like ghostly fingers. "Versiani!" The shout came from a man huddled in the far corner. He was short, balding, and sweating so profusely that his expensive shirt was transparent against his skin. He looked like a rat trapped in a maze that had suddenly caught fire. "The broker," Roberto murmured to me. "Stay behind me." He marched across the room. The other guests were standing up, confusion turning into fear as the first shrill blast of the fire alarm finally cut through the air. Re. The sound was deafening, a sonic assault designed to induce panic. And it worked. The room erupted. Glass shattered as someone knocked over a table. Screams began to rise, joining the mechanical shriek of the alarm. Roberto ignored it all. He grabbed the broker by the lapels of his jacket and hauled him to his feet. "You signaled them," Roberto accused, his voice a low thunder under the alarm. "You tried to sell me out to save your own skin." No, I swear." The broker, his name was Arthur, though he looked less like a king and more like a court jester, shook his head violently. Spittle flew from his lips. "I didn't know they were going to burn the place down. They said it would be clean. They said They lied. Roberto cut him off. He shoved Arthur toward the service door we had just come through. Move. If you stop, I leave you for the fire. Arthur scrambled, tripping over his own feet. Maria, Roberto barked. I was already moving, kicking off my heels. I couldn't run in them, not with the smoke thickening and the floor becoming slick with spilled drinks and panic. I grabbed them by the straps. They were weapons after all, and ran barefoot on the plush carpet. The exits are rigged, I shouted over the alarm. You said the exits are rigged. The public exits, Roberto corrected, pushing Arthur through the door and pulling me through after him. The O'Sullivans expect us to run for the street. They expect us to use the main lobby or the side doors. We aren't doing either. Then where are we going? Down, Roberto said grimly. The laundry chutes. You have got to be kidding me, I muttered, but I kept running. The smoke was heavier in the hallway now, a gray fog that stung the eyes and burned the throat. We weren't the only ones running, but we were the only ones moving away from the exit signs. Roberto navigated the labyrinth of the hotel's bowels with terrifying precision. He knew every turn, every door code. It was a reminder that this man didn't just attend parties. He studied battlegrounds. We reached the laundry processing room. It was a cavernous space filled with massive industrial machines and rolling carts of dirty linens. The air here was hotter, stifling. Here, Roberto pointed to a wide metal chute in the wall. It drops directly to the basement loading dock. The dumpster is cushioned with 3 days' worth of towels. He looked at Arthur. You first. Arthur hesitated, looking at the dark metallic abyss. It's filthy. Roberto didn't argue. He didn't persuade. He simply placed a hand on Arthur's back and shoved. Arthur screamed as he vanished into the chute, his voice echoing away into the darkness. Roberto turned to me. The fire alarm was muffled here, but the heat was rising. He looked at my bare feet, my ruined hair, the silver tray I had dropped miles back. Trust me? He asked. I just hit a man with a serving platter for you, I said, coughing as a wave of smoke rolled into the room. I think we're past the trust exercises. He smirked, a flash of white teeth in the gloom, and lifted me effortlessly. He sat me on the edge of the chute. Keep your arms in, legs crossed. I'll be right behind you. I took a breath, closed my eyes, and pushed off. The slide was terrifyingly fast, a dark, spiraling descent that smelled of detergent and fear. I landed with a soft whump into a mountain of hotel sheets. Before I could scramble out, Arthur was groaning beside me, and a second later, Roberto landed with a heavy thud, rolling instantly to his feet, gun drawn. We were in the loading dock. It was open to the night air, thank God. Rain was still falling, washing away the smoke that clung to our clothes. A black van screeched around the corner, its tires squealing on the wet concrete. The side door slid open. Marco was there, holding an assault rifle. Boss, we have the perimeter secure, but the fire department is 2 minutes out. We need to vanish. Get him in, Roberto ordered, pointing at Arthur. 2 guards jumped out, grabbed the broker, and threw him into the back of the van like a sack of potatoes. Roberto turned to me. He grabbed my waist, lifting me out of the dumpster and setting me on the concrete. My feet were black with soot, my dress torn at the hem. I must have looked like a disaster. You drive with me, he said, guiding me toward the armored SUV parked behind the van. We piled into the back seat. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing out the noise of the sirens wailing in the distance. The silence inside the car was sudden and absolute. Go, Roberto commanded the driver. The SUV surged forward, merging into the traffic, disappearing into the veins of the city. I slumped back against the leather seat, the adrenaline crash hitting me like a physical blow. My hands started to shake. I clamped them between my knees to stop it, but the tremors traveled up my arms. I had almost died. Twice. In the span of an hour. Maria. Roberto's voice was rough. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't looking at the road. He was looking at me. He reached out and took my hands, pulling them from between my knees. He held them in his thumbs rubbing over my knuckles. You're shaking, he murmured. I'm terrified, I admitted, my voice cracking. That wasn't a movie, Roberto. That was real. It was real. he agreed. And you were magnificent. He pulled me closer. I didn't resist. I needed the heat. I needed the contact to prove I was still alive. I slid across the seat until our thighs were touching. He looked down at me, his dark eyes scanning my face, searching for injuries. He saw the soot on my cheek. He lifted a hand and wiped it away with his thumb, his touch agonizingly gentle. You saved my life back there, he said softly. The waiter, he had the drop on me. I was focused on the corridor. I didn't see him turn. He hesitated, I whispered. He looked at his watch. That's the only reason I had time. No. Roberto shook his head. You had time because you were watching. Because you care. His hand moved from my cheek to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in the hair that the expensive stylist had spent hours perfecting. He exerted a gentle pressure, pulling me toward him. Maria. He groaned, a sound that came from deep in his chest. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a tentative first kiss. It wasn't sweet. It was a collision. It was the taste of smoke and whiskey and survival. His lips were hard, demanding, claiming me with a desperation that matched my own. I opened to him instantly, my hands finding purchase on the lapels of his ruined tuxedo jacket, pulling him closer. The kiss devoured the space between us. It was a release of all the fear, all the anger, all the tension that had been building since the moment I saw him in the rain. He tasted like danger. He tasted like power. And God help me, I wanted to drown in it. He groaned into my mouth, his hand sliding down my spine, tracing the exposed skin of my back through the open dress. His touch was electric, igniting fires that the rain outside couldn't touch. I arched into him, forgetting the car, the driver, the war. For a moment, there was just him, just this man who made me feel terrified and invincible all at once. When he finally pulled back, we were both gasping for air. His forehead rested against mine, his eyes closed, his breathing ragged. I should not have done that, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Why? I asked, my lips tingling. Because I cannot offer you anything but war, he said, opening his eyes. The darkness was back in them, swirling with regret and desire. And you deserve peace. I don't want peace right now, I said fiercely. I want to know that we won. Roberto stared at me for a long heartbeat, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. He kissed my forehead, a sharp, hard press of his lips, and sat back, putting a few inches of distance between us. He needed to think. He needed to be the general again. We won the battle, he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out the phone, the one he had taken from the waiter. Now, we need to win the war. He tapped the screen. It was cracked, but functional. The assassin was careless, Roberto muttered, scrolling through the device. He didn't wipe his texts. He thought he was going to walk out of there. What does it say? I asked, leaning over to look. The screen was bright in the dim car. Orders, Roberto said. Coordinates for the hit, timestamps, and this. He pointed to a message thread. The sender was listed only as unlisted. Message received 8:45 p.m. Target entering. Do not miss. The wolf is distracted by the girl. Message sent 8:46 p.m. Confirmed. Taking the shot in the corridor. Message received 8:47 p.m. Make it messy. I want the headline to bleed. The wolf is distracted by the girl. I read aloud, a chill running down my spine. They were watching us. They are always watching, Roberto said absently. But look at the timestamp of the first message. 8:45 p.m. So? At 8:45 p.m. I was in the elevator. My signal was jammed. The only people who knew exactly when I was walking into that hallway were the people in my ear. He looked at me, his face grim. The text came from inside my command center. It came from the penthouse. I covered my mouth with my hand. Marco? No. Roberto shook his head immediately. Marco was in the van. He was running the perimeter. It was someone else. Someone who had access to the live feed. He scrolled up. There's more. A location pin sent 3 days ago. It's an address in the meatpacking district. An old warehouse. Let me see, I said, an instinct prickling at the back of my mind. He handed me the phone. I looked at the map pin. It was a blurry satellite image of a brick building near the docks. But it wasn't the address that caught my eye. It was the photo attached to the message below it, a photo of the drop zone for the payment. It was a photo of a graffiti-covered door with a very specific tag sprayed in neon green paint. An anchor, wrapped in a snake. My breath hitched. The image slammed into me like a physical memory. "I know this place," I whispered. Roberto turned to me sharply. "What?" "I know this door," I said, my finger hovering over the screen. "I've stood in front of it." "Maria, think carefully," Roberto said, his voice intense. "This is important. Where is this?" "It's not the meatpacking district," I said, looking closer. "The GPS is spoofed. They faked the location pin to throw off anyone who intercepted it. But the photo is real." I closed my eyes, transporting myself back to 3 months ago. "The hotel where I work," I began, my voice gaining strength. "The loading dock in the back alley. It connects to the service tunnels that run under the entire block. There's a door down there, an old maintenance entrance that nobody uses because it's flooded half the time." I opened my eyes and looked at Roberto. "I went down there once to hide from my manager when I broke a vase. I saw men there. 2 of them. One was wearing a suit like yours. The other was rough. He had a tattoo on his neck. An anchor and a snake. The O'Sullivan crest," Roberto hissed. "They were arguing," I continued, the memory sharpening. "The man in the suit gave the other guy a heavy envelope. He said, 'The basement is secure. No one checks the boiler room in the East Wing anymore.'" Roberto's eyes widened. "The East Wing of your hotel? It's been under renovation for 2 years, I nodded. "It's abandoned. Dust sheets, scaffolding. No guests go there. No staff goes there. Perfect cover," Roberto murmured. "A fortress hidden in plain sight, right under the nose of the city." He took the phone back from me, his mind racing, connecting the dots. "You said you saw a man in a suit," Roberto pressed. "Did you see his face?" "Only his profile," I said. "He was older, gray hair. He walked with a limp, like his left leg bothered him." Roberto went still. The air in the car seemed to freeze. "A limp," he repeated, his voice barely audible. "Yes. He was using a cane. A black cane with a silver handle." Roberto closed his eyes. He leaned his head back against the seat, a look of profound, devastating betrayal washing over his face. It was worse than the grief I had seen in the rain. This was the look of a man who realizes the knife in his back was placed there by his own blood. "Uncle Carlo," he whispered. "Who?" "Carlo Verciani," Roberto said, opening his eyes. They were cold now. "Dead. My father's brother. The man who taught me how to tie my shoes. The man who sat at my table last Sunday and toasted to Matteo's safe return." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "He has a bad hip. He uses a cane." "Oh my God," I whispered. "He's the one? He's the traitor?" "He always wanted the chair," Roberto said, his voice void of emotion. "He thought he should have been Don when my father died. But the families chose me." He smiled. He bowed. He waited. He looked at the phone in his hand, then crushed it in his grip until the screen splintered. "He sold my son to the O'Sullivans to break me," Roberto said. "He thought if I was weak, if I was grieving, the commission would vote to replace me. He would step in as the stable leader." "And the O'Sullivans?" I asked. "What do they get?" "Territory," Roberto said. "And the pleasure of watching the Vercianis destroy themselves from the inside." The SUV slowed down. We were approaching the safe house building, but Roberto didn't move to open the door. He sat there, vibrating with a lethal energy. "Marco," he said into the intercom connecting us to the driver. "Change of plans. Boss? We are not going back to the penthouse. The penthouse is compromised. If Carlo is the leak, he has the codes. He has eyes in that room." "Where to, boss?" Roberto looked at me. He looked at my soot-stained face, my bare feet, the fierce determination in my eyes. "We are going to the estate," he said. "The Long Island compound." Boss, the estate hasn't been prepped for." "I don't care," Roberto snapped. "It's the only place with a hardline security system that Carlo can't override remotely. We go there,
We fortify. And then he looked at me, and the darkness in his eyes was terrifying. And then we go to war. I am going to burn the O'Sullivans to the ground. And then I am going to kill my uncle. He reached out and took my hand again. This time, his grip was painful. Desperate. You stay with Matteo, he said. You keep him safe, because if Carlo knows we survived tonight, he will come for the boy. He has to. It's his only card left. I won't let him touch him, I vowed. I have a serving tray, remember? Roberto looked at me, and for a fleeting second the wolf was gone and the man was back. He lifted my hand to his lips and kissed the soot-stained knuckles. I remember, he said. I will never forget. The car swerved onto the highway, speeding toward the darkness of Long Island, leaving the burning city behind us. But the real fire was sitting right next to me, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that it was going to consume everything in its path. The adrenaline that had fueled our escape from the burning hotel began to curdle into a cold, hard exhaustion as the armored SUV crossed the city limits. The frenetic energy of Manhattan faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the oppressive darkness of the Long Island Expressway. I sat in the back, Matteo asleep on my lap. He had woken up during the transfer from the van to the SUV, terrified and disoriented. But the moment I wrapped my arms around him, he had collapsed back into a fitful slumber. Lily was slumped against my shoulder, her breathing even. A small anchor of normalcy in a world that had gone completely insane. Roberto was in the front passenger seat, not the back. He was on the phone, coordinating a war. His voice was low, a continuous stream of orders delivered in a mix of English and Italian that sounded more like weapon fire than language. Seal the perimeter, he commanded. I want the K9 units on the north wall. I want the thermal cameras calibrated. If a squirrel crosses the lawn, I want to know its heart rate. We turned off the highway onto a private road that wound through dense skeletal trees. There were no streetlights here. The only illumination came from the headlights cutting through the gloom, revealing patches of fog that clung to the ground like ghosts. We are approaching the gate, the driver announced. I looked out the window. Looming out of the darkness was a structure that looked less like a home entrance and more like the gates of a medieval citadel. 12-foot high iron spikes, reinforced with steel plates, blocked the road. A guardhouse sat to the right, fortified with bulletproof glass. The SUV slowed. A red laser scanned the windshield. A moment later, the heavy gates groaned and swung open. Welcome to the estate, Roberto said, hanging up the phone and turning to look at me. It's not the penthouse. It doesn't have a view. But it was built to withstand a siege. We drove up a long, winding driveway, lined with ancient oaks. At the top of the hill stood the mansion. It was a sprawling beast of gray stone, ivy climbing the walls like dark veins. It was beautiful in a severe, intimidating way. It looked cold. It looked impenetrable. And right now, that was exactly what I wanted. The car stopped in the circular driveway. Before the engine cut, the front doors of the mansion flew open. A phalanx of staff and guards poured out, moving with disciplined urgency. Roberto got out first. He opened my door, his face grim. Leave the bags, he told the staff. Secure the children. Get them inside. Code Black protocols are in effect. I stepped out, lifting Matteo into my arms. He was heavy, a dead weight of sleeping child, but I refused to let anyone else take him. Lily woke up, rubbing her eyes, clutching the strap of my dress. Maria, she mumbled. Are we there? Yes, Bug, I whispered, shivering as the damp night air hit my bare skin. The back of my dress was still open, a reminder of the gala and the glamour that felt like a lifetime ago. We're here. We were ushered into a grand foyer that smelled of lemon polish and old money. The floors were black and white marble, stretching out under a chandelier that looked like a frozen explosion of crystal. A double staircase curved up to the second floor. An older woman in a severe black uniform stepped forward. She had gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Verciani, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. The East Wing has been prepared as you requested. The nursery is secure. Thank you, Elena, Roberto said. This is Maria Foster, and these are the children. They are under your care, If anything happens to them, I know the penalty, sir. Elena cut him off, not with insolence, but with a terrifying acceptance. She looked at me. I will run a bath for the boy. And find you some clothes, Miss Foster. You look like you've walked through hell. I drove through it, I corrected, shifting Matteo's weight. Go with Elena, Roberto said to me. Get them settled. I have work to do. He didn't wait for a response. He turned and marched toward a set of heavy oak doors on the left, followed by Marco and 3 other guards. He was shifting gears again, from protector to predator. 2 hours later, the mansion was quiet, or at least as quiet as a house preparing for war could be. I had scrubbed the soot from my skin in a bathroom that was larger than my entire kitchen back in the city. The water had turned gray as it swirled down the drain, taking with it the smell of smoke and fear. I had dressed Matteo in clean pajamas found in a drawer that had clearly been waiting for him for a long time. Now, we were in the nursery. It wasn't a sterile room like the one in the penthouse. This room had hand-painted murals of clouds on the ceiling. It had wooden toys that looked handmade. It felt like a room where a child had actually lived once. Matteo was sitting on the rug, pushing a wooden train back and forth. He was still silent, his eyes distant. But he wasn't shaking anymore. Lily was sitting next to him, reading aloud from a book she had found, her voice a soft, rhythmic hum in the room. I was standing by the window looking out at the grounds. Floodlights illuminated the lawn, revealing the patrolling guards with their dogs. The door opened. I turned, expecting Elena. Instead, it was Roberto. He had changed. The tuxedo was gone. He was wearing tactical gear now, black cargo pants, heavy boots, and a tight black thermal shirt that clung to his chest. A holster was strapped to his thigh, and he was adjusting a Kevlar vest over his torso. He looked terrifying, and he looked like the only thing standing between us and the abyss. You're leaving, I said. It wasn't a question. The intel you gave us was perfect, Roberto said, walking over to the crib where he had laid out a map. My team confirmed it. The abandoned east wing of the hotel. Heat signatures show at least 20 men inside, and one high-value target sitting in what used to be the boiler room. Your uncle, I whispered. Carlo, he confirmed. His voice was devoid of emotion, cold as the grave. He thinks he is safe. He thinks I am still chasing ghosts in the city. He is waiting for the news that I died in the fire. And when he finds out you didn't, he won't have time to find out, Roberto said. We hit them in 1 hour. Silent breach. We go in through the service tunnels you told me about. We cut the head off the snake. He looked at Matteo. The boy hadn't looked up when his father entered. He was still pushing the train, lost in his own world. Roberto's face softened, the mask cracking for just a second. He walked over to the rug. He knelt down, one knee hitting the floor with a heavy thud. Matteo, he said softly. Matteo stopped the train. He didn't look at Roberto. He looked at me. I nodded. It's okay. Matteo looked back at his father. I am going to fix this, Roberto promised him. I am going to make sure the monsters never come back. Do you understand? Matteo stared at him. Then slowly, he reached out and touched the tactical vest. He tapped the hard ceramic plate over Roberto's heart. Roberto covered the small hand with his own large one. He closed his eyes, drawing strength from the contact. Then he stood up. He walked over to me. Walk me out, he said. I followed him into the hallway. The house was silent, but it felt alive, humming with tension. The security here is different from the city, Roberto explained as we walked toward the foyer. It's not just cameras and motion sensors. It's a hardwired biometric lockdown. Once I leave, Marco will engage the fortress protocol. Steel shutters will cover every window and door. The only way in is with a retinal scan and a voice print that matches the authorized database. Who is in the database? I asked. Me, Marco, Elena, and the top tier of my security detail. He paused. And family. My stomach tightened. Family? You mean Carlo? Carlo was removed from the digital access list for the penthouse, Roberto said. But this system is older. It's a localized server. To remove his bioprint, I would need to physically access the mainframe in the basement bunker and manually delete his file.
It takes hours to recode the master key. So he can get in? I asked, panic flaring. He won't be coming here, Maria, Roberto said, gripping my shoulders. He is at the hotel. My scouts have eyes on him. He is directing the operation from his hole. I am going to him. I am bringing the fight to his door so he never has a chance to come to mine. But what if? There is no what if, he interrupted fiercely. I am leaving Marco here with 6 of my best men. They are stationed at every entry point. Even if Carlos somehow grew wings and flew here, he would have to get through a wall of lead before he touched a doorknob. He pulled me closer. You are the last line of defense, Maria. You stay in the nursery. You keep the door locked. If you hear shooting, you go into the closet. There is a trap door under the rug. It leads to a panic room in the foundation. Do not come out until you hear my voice. I understand, I said. He stared down at me. The hallway was dimly lit, casting shadows across his face. You saved him, he said, his voice rough. You brought him back to me. Now let me finish it. He leaned down and kissed me. It wasn't like the kiss in the car, that had been fueled by adrenaline and survival. This was a goodbye. It was heavy, desperate, and filled with a terrifying amount of tenderness. He kissed me like he was trying to memorize the taste of my breath, just in case he didn't come back. When he pulled away, his eyes were burning. When I come back, he whispered, we change everything. No more hiding, no more fear. Just come back, I said. He nodded once, turned, and walked out the front door. I watched him go. I watched the heavy oak door slam shut. I heard the mechanical whir of the steel shutters descending, sealing us inside the stone belly of the beast. The silence that followed was oppressive. I went back upstairs. Marco was standing guard outside the nursery door. He was a giant of a man, silent and imposing, holding an assault rifle across his chest. He nodded to me as I approached. Ms. Foster, the house is sealed. We are secure. Thank you, Marco, I said. I went inside. The children were hungry. The stress had burned through whatever meager energy they had left. I'm hungry, Lily complained, rubbing her stomach. Me too, I said, forcing a smile. Let's see what we can find. I didn't want to leave the room, but the nurseryette only had juice boxes. I rang the bell for Elena. She appeared moments later with a tray. Mr. Versiani said you prefer to handle the food yourself, she said, setting down a bowl of pasta and fresh bread, cooked by my own hands. I tasted it in front of the camera in the kitchen if you wish to review the footage. I trust you, Elena, I said, and I meant it. She looked like the kind of woman who would poison a king to save a child. I set the tray down on the small table. Dinner time. Matteo scrambled over. He smelled the tomato sauce, the same smell that had filled my apartment for a week. It was familiar. It was safe. He ate voraciously, getting sauce on his clean pajamas. I didn't scold him. I just wiped his chin with a napkin. It's good, right? I asked him. He looked at me. His big, dark eyes, so like his father's, searched my face. He reached out and touched my cheek, his small fingers tracing the line of my jaw. Then he opened his mouth. His throat worked, fighting against the silence that trauma had imposed on him. Ma'am, he croaked. I froze. Lily stopped chewing. Matteo? I whispered. He swallowed hard and tried again. The sound was clearer this time. Mama. My heart shattered into a million pieces. He wasn't calling for his biological mother. She was a ghost he didn't remember. He was calling for the feeling. He was calling for the safety. He was calling for me. Tears pricked my eyes. I pulled him into a hug, burying my face in his curls. I'm here, I choked out. I'm right here, baby. I'm not going anywhere. He wrapped his arms around my neck and sighed, a long, shuddering release of tension. Mama, he whispered again, like a magic spell to keep the darkness at bay. I held him tight, rocking him back and forth. Outside, a storm was brewing, both in the sky and in the city where Roberto was hunting. But in here, in this moment, there was peace. And then, the lights flickered. It was just a momentary dimming, barely noticeable. But my father had taught me to notice everything, I looked up at the ceiling. The lights buzzed and returned to full brightness. A second later, a sound echoed through the house. It wasn't a gunshot. It wasn't a scream. It was the chime of the front door security system. A pleasant, melodic ding-dong that signaled an authorized entry. I pulled back from Mateo, my blood running cold. "Lily, get in the closet," I ordered, my voice sharp. "What?" "Now," I snapped. "Take Mateo. Go into the closet. Do not make a sound." I stood up, moving toward the door. I cracked it open just an inch to look into the hallway. Marco was there, his hand to his earpiece, looking confused. "Control, report," Marco was saying. "Why did the perimeter alarm disengage? Who authorized the gate opening?" Static crackled in the silence. "Control," Marco barked. Then I heard it. The sound of the heavy front door opening downstairs. It wasn't forced. It glided open on well-oiled hinges. "Marco," a voice called out from the foyer. It was a smooth, familiar voice. An older voice. "Stand down. It's family." Marco froze. He lowered his rifle slightly, confusion warring with protocol. "Uncle Carlo?" Marco called down. "Sir, the boss said, Roberto sent me." The voice lied effortlessly. "The raid was a trap. He needs reinforcements. I'm here to secure the children." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. He's here. Roberto was wrong. The intel was wrong. The man in the boiler room wasn't Carlo. It was a decoy. Carlo hadn't been waiting to be killed. He had been waiting for Roberto to leave. He had waited for the wolf to leave the den so he could come for the cubs. And because the biometric system hadn't been updated, the house had welcomed him in. I slammed the nursery door shut and locked it. I ran to the closet where Lily and Mateo were huddled. "Get in the trap door," I whispered, pulling the rug back. "Go down. Now." "Maria?" Lily asked, terrified. "Go!" I pushed them down into the darkness of the panic space and slammed the trap door shut. I threw the rug back over it. I stood up. I looked around the room for a weapon. There were only wooden toys and soft pillows. Then I remembered. The tray. Elena had left the heavy porcelain serving bowl and the silver knife for the bread. I grabbed the knife. It was serrated, meant for crusty bread. Not combat, but it was sharp. I moved to the side of the door, pressing my back against the wall. I listened. I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs, the thump-thump of a cane hitting the marble. "Marco, move aside." Carlo's voice drifted up. "Sir, I have strict orders." Marco sounded unsure. "Code black. No one sees the boy." "I am his great-uncle, you idiot." "I changed his diapers. Now move, or I will have your badge." A pause. Then, a sound that made me flinch. 3 suppressed coughs. Pfft, pfft, pfft. The sound of bodies hitting the floor. Marco was down. The elite guard, the wall of lead, gone. Because he hesitated. Because he trusted the family clearance. The footsteps continued down the hall. Slow, deliberate, the cane tapping a rhythm of death. Tap, step, tap, step. He stopped outside the nursery door. The handle jiggled. Locked. "Maria," Carlo's voice came through the wood. It was sickeningly sweet. "I know you're in there. I saw the footage from the gala. You're a clever girl." I didn't answer. I gripped the bread knife until my palm hurt. "Open the door, Maria. Roberto is dead. The O'Sullivans took him. I'm here to save the children. We need to leave before they get here." "Liar." "Go away," I shouted. "I have a gun." Carlo laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. "No, you don't. Roberto took all the guns. He doesn't trust women with firepower. A fatal mistake." Something heavy slammed into the door. The wood splintered but held. "I have the master key, Maria," Carlo said, his voice dropping an octave. "But I prefer to break things. It's more satisfying." Another slam. The hinges groaned. I looked at the closet where the children were hiding. I looked at the knife in my hand. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a mafia princess. I was a girl from Ohio who knew how to spot a predator. And I knew that if that door opened, only one of us was leaving this room alive. I took a deep breath, raised the knife, and waited for the wolf to break in. "Come and get me," I whispered. The heavy oak door of the nursery shuddered under the force of the impact. Wood groaned, a high-pitched protest that sounded like a scream in the silence of the sealed house. I stood in the center of the room, my back to the closet where my entire world was huddled in the dark. My hands were shaking, not with the tremors of the cold, but with the violent vibration of pure, uncut adrenaline. The silver bread knife felt ridiculous in my grip. A serrated piece of dining ware against a man who had just executed a team of elite guards. Bam. Another hit. A hairline crack appeared in the white paint of the doorframe. "Maria." Carlo's voice drifted through the wood, calm and conversational, as if he were asking to borrow a cup of sugar. "Don't make this difficult. I have a key. But the deadbolt is stubborn, just like you." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My tongue felt like sandpaper, and my heart was beating so loud I was sure he could hear it through the door. I scanned the room again, desperate for an advantage. The nursery was soft. It was designed for knees that scraped against rugs and heads that bumped against table legs. It was a room of safety, not a kill box. Bam! The wood around the lock splintered. The door swung open, hitting the wall with a deafening crash. Uncle Carlo stood in the doorway. He looked exactly as Roberto had described him, an elderly statesman of crime. He was wearing a camel hair coat over a pristine suit, a silk scarf draped loosely around his neck. He leaned heavily on a black cane with a silver handle shaped like a lion's head. He looked frail. He looked like a grandfather coming for a visit, except for the gun in his right hand. It was a pistol, sleek and black, with a suppressor screwed onto the barrel. It looked heavy in his wrinkled hand, but his grip was steady. He stepped over the threshold, his eyes scanning the room. He ignored me at first. He looked at the empty bed. He looked at the toy train abandoned on the rug. "Gone to ground," he murmured, a small smile playing on his thin lips. "Smart girl." Then, his gaze landed on me. He looked at the bread knife in my hand, and his smile widened into something pitying. "Oh, my dear," he chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "What do you plan to do with that? Make me a sandwich?" "Get out," I said. My voice was low, guttural. It didn't sound like me. It sounded like the growl of a cornered animal. "I'm afraid I can't do that," Carlo said, taking a step forward. The cane clicked on the hardwood floor. Tap, step, tap. "You have something that belongs to me." "He's not a thing," I spat. "He's a boy. He's your blood." "He is leverage," Carlo corrected, his face hardening. "He is the key to the kingdom. Roberto is weak. He is sentimental. He lets women and children distract him from business. Look at him tonight, running off to a decoy location while I walked right through his front door." He took another step. He was 10 feet away. "Where are they, Maria?" He raised the gun, pointing it lazily at my chest. "The closet? The bathroom? Or did you find the trap door? I know this house better than Roberto does. I built the panic room specifications in 1995. My blood ran cold. He knew. Of course he knew. "They aren't here," I lied. "I sent them down the laundry chute. They're running through the woods." "In a storm? Without coats?" Carlo shook his head. "You're a bad liar. You're standing right in front of the closet door. You're guarding it." He moved the gun. He pointed it past me, directly at the closet door. "Come out, Matteo!" he shouted. "Great Uncle Carlo is here. I have candy." Silence from the closet. My brave, terrified children were holding their breath. "Come out, or I will shoot the pretty lady," Carlo threatened, his finger tightening on the trigger. I didn't think. I didn't weigh the odds. I reacted with the primal instinct that my father had drilled into me during those long, paranoid nights in Ohio. When the predator looks away, you strike. Carlo's eyes had flickered to the closet for a fraction of a second. I lunged. I covered the 10 feet between us in a burst of speed fueled by sheer terror. I didn't aim for his chest or his head. I aimed for the only weakness I knew he had. His left leg. The bad hip. I dropped to my knees as I reached him, swinging the serrated knife with both hands. The blade sliced through the expensive wool of his trousers and bit deep into the flesh of his thigh. Carlo screamed. It was a high, shocked sound. His leg buckled. He crumbled, his weight collapsing onto the injured side. The cane clattered to the floor. But he didn't drop the gun. He flailed, his free hand striking me across the face. The heavy ring on his finger caught my cheekbone, splitting the skin. Stars exploded in my vision. I fell back, tasting copper. But I scrambled up instantly. Carlo was on the floor, clutching his leg, blood seeping through his fingers. His face was twisted into a mask of pure hate. "You bitch!" he shrieked. "You filthy little stray!" He raised the gun again. He was on the ground, but at this range, he couldn't miss. I looked around. The lamp. I grabbed the heavy ceramic lamp from the bedside table, a hand-painted elephant, and ripped the cord from the wall. I hurled it at him. It smashed into his shoulder, knocking his aim off just as he fired. Pfft! The suppressed shot hit the wall inches from my head, showering me in plaster dust. "I'm going to kill you slowly," Carlo roared, trying to drag himself upright using the bed frame. I didn't wait for him to steady himself. I dove for him again. I wasn't fighting like a soldier. I was fighting like a mother. I grabbed his gun hand, wrestling for the weapon. He was old, but he was desperate, and he was heavy. He slammed his forehead into the bridge of my nose. Pain blinded me. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the blood. "Give me the gun," I screamed, digging my nails into his wrist. "Die!" he snarled. He twisted the gun, trying to angle the barrel toward my stomach. I felt the cold metal press against my ribs. I bit him. I clamped my teeth onto his forearm, biting down until I tasted blood. He howled and reflexively jerked his arm back. The gun skittered across the floor, sliding under the crib. We both froze. Then we both moved. I scrambled on my hands and knees, ignoring the pain in my face, the roaring in my ears. I dove under the crib, my fingers scrabbling for the weapon. Carlo was slower. He dragged his injured leg, cursing, reaching for his cane to hook my ankle. My fingers brushed cold steel. I grabbed the gun. I rolled onto my back and scrambled out from under the crib, raising the weapon with shaking hands. "Stop!" I screamed. Carlo froze. He was halfway to a standing position, leaning heavily on the mattress. He looked at me, and then he looked at the gun barrel pointed at his chest. He paused, then slowly. A sneer curled his lip. "You won't shoot," he scoffed, panting heavily. "You're a chambermaid. You change sheets. You don't take lives." "Try me," I gasped, wiping blood from my eye. "Take one more step." "You don't have the spine," Carlo said, edging closer. "Give me the gun, Maria. I'll make it quick. I promise." He took a step. I didn't hesitate. I remembered Roberto's words. "You are the last line of defense." I lowered my aim slightly and pulled the trigger. The recoil surprised me, jerking my arms up. The bullet didn't hit his chest. It hit his good leg, shattering the kneecap. Carlo collapsed again, this time with a scream that sounded wet and bubbling. He hit the floor hard, writhing in agony. "My leg! My God, my leg!" I scrambled backward, putting distance between us. I kept the gun trained on him. My breathing was ragged, sobbing gasps tearing from my throat. "I told you to stop," I whispered. The room was suddenly filled with a silence broken only by Carlo's whimpering. I stood there, a woman in a ruined silk dress, blood on my face, holding a gun that was too big for my hands. Then I heard it. Heavy boots running in the hallway. Not the slow tap of a cane, the thunder of a charge. "Maria!" Roberto's voice roared through the house. It was filled with such panic and fury that it shook the walls. "In here!" I screamed, not taking my eyes off Carlo. The shattered door was kicked fully off its hinges. Roberto burst into the room, his assault rifle raised, scanning for a target. He saw Carlo on the floor, bleeding from 2 wounds. He saw the bread knife embedded in the rug. And then he saw me. He stopped. He took in the blood on my face, the gun in my hand, the ferocity in my stance. "Maria," he breathed, lowering his rifle. "I shot him," I said, my voice trembling now that the danger was paused. He tried to get to the closet." Roberto looked at his uncle.
The look on his face wasn't triumph. It was disgust. He walked over to Carlo, who was trying to stem the bleeding with his scarf. Roberto kicked the cane away. "You," Roberto said, his voice quiet and terrible. "You came into my house. You threatened my son." "Roberto," Carlo wheezed, his face gray. "Listen to me. It was business. The O'Sullivans, they forced me. They threatened to expose the accounts." "Liar," Roberto said. "You wanted the throne." He looked at me. "Are they safe?" "The closet," I said, nodding. "Trapdoor." Roberto walked over to me. He gently took the gun from my shaking hands. He clicked the safety on and set it on the dresser. Then he wrapped his arms around me. I collapsed against him. The adrenaline cut out like a severed wire, leaving me weak. I buried my face in his tactical vest, sobbing. "You're hurt," he said, touching my cheek. "He hit you." I bit him. I mumbled into his chest. Roberto let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. He kissed the top of my head, holding me so tight I could barely breathe. "You are incredible," he whispered. "You held the line." He pulled back, looking into my eyes. "Stay here. Don't look." He turned back to Carlo. Carlo looked up, his eyes wide with fear. "Roberto, please. Family. Blood." "You lost the right to that word when you walked through that door," Roberto said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a speech. He simply drew his sidearm, not the rifle, but the personal pistol he carried, and aimed. "Roberto, no!" Carlo screamed. "Think about the commission. Think about—" Bang. One shot. Clean. Final. The silence returned, heavier this time. Roberto holstered his weapon. He didn't look at the body. He walked straight to the closet. He threw the door open and ripped the rug back. He pounded on the trap door. "Matteo, Lily, it's Papa, open up." There was a pause, a moment of agonizing stillness. Then, the sound of the latch sliding back. The trap door lifted. Lily's blonde head poked out, her eyes wide as saucers. "Is the bad man gone?" she whispered. Roberto reached down and lifted her out, then reached back in for Matteo. He pulled his son into his arms, crushing him against his chest. Matteo was shaking, but he was unharmed. He looked at Roberto, then over Roberto's shoulder at me. He saw the blood on my face. He wiggled out of Roberto's arms and ran to me. He wrapped his arms around my legs, burying his face in my skirt. "Mama?" he cried, the word clear and loud this time. Mama hurt. I dropped to my knees, hugging him. "I'm okay, baby. I'm okay. It's just a scratch. We won." Roberto stood over us, watching. The warlord was gone. The father was back, but there was something new in his eyes as he looked at me. A reverence. A realization that the dynamic had shifted forever. He knelt down beside us, encompassing us both in his arms. We were a tangled mess of blood, tears, and relief on the floor of a nursery that had become a battlefield. "I came back," he whispered to me, his forehead resting against mine. I realized halfway to the city. The sensors, the specific sequence of the alarms. It was too clean. I turned the convoy around. "You were just in time," I said. "No." Roberto shook his head, looking at the body of his uncle in the corner. "I was late. You were the one who saved them, Maria. You fought him." "He had a cane," I said, with a weak smile. "I had a lamp." Roberto laughed, a sound of pure release. He kissed me, tasting the blood on my lip, unbothered by the violence that surrounded us. "Let's get out of this room," he said, standing up and pulling me with him. "Elena is in the panic room downstairs. The house is secure now, truly secure." He picked up Matteo. I picked up Lily. We walked out of the nursery, stepping over the debris of the door. As we walked down the hallway, past the body of Marco, who had died hesitating, Roberto reached out and squeezed my hand. "Tonight ends the war," he said. "Tomorrow we build something new." I squeezed back. My hand was bruised, my face was throbbing, and I had just shot a man. I wasn't the girl who found a lost boy in the rain anymore. I was something else, something forged in fire. "Tomorrow," I agreed. But as we descended the stairs, I knew that for us, tomorrow would bring a different kind of challenge.
the challenge of living after the surviving. The front doors were open, revealing the night sky. The storm had passed. The clouds were breaking, revealing a sliver of moon. Roberto stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at his son, then at me. "Home," he said. It wasn't a description of the building. It was a declaration of what we were. I looked at the man who had brought danger to my door and realized I didn't want him to leave. I looked at the boy who called me mother and knew I would never leave him. "Home," I whispered back. Roberto signaled to the surviving guards. "Clean this up and get the car. We are going to the lake house. I want the children away from the smell of bleach." "Yes, boss." We walked out into the cool night air. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that didn't smell of gunpowder. The nightmare was over. But the dream, the complicated, dangerous, beautiful dream, was just beginning. I looked at the tracker bracelet on my wrist, glittering in the moonlight. It was no longer a leash. It was a promise. I was found, and I was never going to be lost again. 2 weeks later, the silence at the lake house was different from the silence in the city. In the city, silence was a warning, a predator holding its breath before the strike. Here, surrounded by acres of pine forest and the glassy, undisturbed surface of the water, silence was just peace. It was terrifying in its own way. I stood in the center of the guest bedroom, a room that smelled of lavender and fresh linen, and zipped up my duffel bag. The sound was harsh, a mechanical tear in the quiet afternoon. It was the same bag I had packed in 3 minutes back in my basement apartment. It held the same worn-out jeans, the same gray sweaters, the same life I had left behind. I was leaving. The war was over. The O'Sullivan cartel had been dismantled, their leadership scattered or buried. The internal threat, Carlo, was gone, his name erased from the family history books, his body disposed of in a place Roberto assured me would never be found. The Versiani Empire was secure. Matteo was safe. And I was... what? I was the loose end that had tied itself into a knot. I was the anomaly. For 14 days, we had lived in this suspended reality. I had cooked breakfast in a kitchen that cost more than a neighborhood block. I had watched movies with the children. I had sat on the porch with Roberto in the evenings, watching the sun dip below the tree line, saying everything and nothing. But we hadn't talked about the future. Not really. I ran my hand over the canvas of the bag. It was time. If I stayed any longer, I wouldn't just be the woman who saved his son. I would be the woman who couldn't let go. I would be the reminder of the worst week of his life. Every time he looked at me, he would remember the kidnapping, the fear, the blood on the nursery floor. I didn't want to be a living scar. I wanted to be a memory he could look back on with gratitude, not obligation. "Maria," Lily's voice came from the doorway. She was holding a stuffed rabbit that Roberto had bought for her. She was wearing a dress that didn't have holes in it. Her hair was clean, shiny, and braided with a ribbon. She looked like a different child. "Hey, Bug," I said, forcing a smile that felt brittle on my face. "Why is your bag on the bed?" she asked, clutching the rabbit tighter. "Because we have to go, sweetie," I said, kneeling down to be at her eye level. "We can't stay here forever. This is Mr. Versiani's house. We have our own home. Our home has bugs," Lily said matter-of-factly. "And the radiator makes scary noises. And there's no Matteo." The mention of his name caused a physical ache in my chest. Matteo, the boy who had started calling me Mama every morning when he woke up. The word meant mom in his family's language, and every time he used it, something in my chest stitched itself back together. The boy who wouldn't sleep unless I checked under his bed. "I know," I whispered, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. "But we have to go back to real life. Roberto, Mr. Versiani, he has a lot of work to do. We don't want to be in the way." "He said we aren't in the way," Lily argued, her chin trembling. "He said we are inside the walls." "It's complicated, Lily," I sighed, standing up. "Go downstairs and put your shoes on. I'll be down in a minute." She looked at me with the betrayal only a 6-year-old can muster, then turned and ran down the hall. I heard her footsteps fade, leaving me alone with my decision. I grabbed the handle of the bag. It felt heavy, heavier than it had when I arrived. I turned toward the door, ready to walk out, ready to call a cab from the main road if I had to. The door opened. Roberto filled the frame. He wasn't wearing the tactical gear he had worn the night of the raid, nor the tuxedo from the gala. He was wearing dark jeans and a navy cashmere sweater that softened the hard lines of his shoulders. But his face, that sharp, devastating face, was as intense as ever. He looked at the bag in my hand. Then he looked at me. He didn't speak. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. I heard the lock click. Then, he did something that made my breath hitch. He took the key out of the lock, walked over to the open window, and tossed it out. It glittered in the afternoon sun before vanishing into the rose bushes 2 stories down. He turned back to me, crossing his arms over his chest. "What do you think you are doing?" he asked. His voice was calm, dangerously so. "I'm packing," I said, gripping the bag tighter to hide the tremor in my hands. "I'm going home, Roberto." "Home," he repeated, tasting the word. "To the basement? To the leak in the ceiling? To the diner manager who fires you for being 10 minutes late? To my life," I corrected, lifting my chin. "The war is over. You won. You have your son back. The threat is gone. And so you just leave?" He took a step toward me. "You pack a bag and walk out the door without a word?" "I was going to leave a note," I lied. "I wasn't going to leave a note. I couldn't have written one without falling apart." "A note?" he scoffed. A dark, incredulous sound. "You were going to leave a note for Mateo? For the boy who asks for you before he asks for water? How does that note read, Maria? 'Dear Mateo, sorry I saved your life. Good luck with the trauma.'" "Don't do that," I snapped, tears stinging my eyes. "Don't make me feel guilty for doing the right thing. I'm leaving because I care about him. I'm leaving because I don't belong here, Roberto. Look at this place." I gestured to the silk drapes, the mahogany furniture. "This is a palace. I am a maid. I don't fit." "You fit where I say you fit," he growled. "That's not how the world works," I shouted back, the frustration boiling over. "You can't just command people to belong. I am a reminder of the worst thing that ever happened to you. Every time you look at me, you see the danger. You see the night you almost lost him. You don't need that. You need to move on. You need a normal life. A normal life," he murmured, stepping closer until he was looming over me. "You think I want normal? I am a Verciani. I was born in blood. I will die in blood. There is no normal for me." He reached out and ripped the bag from my hand. He didn't throw it. He set it down on the floor with deliberate care, then kicked it under the bed. "You are not a reminder of the danger," he said, his voice dropping to that rough, intimate whisper that turned my knees to water. "You are the reminder that I survived it. You are the only reason I am not burying a son this week." "I did what anyone would have done," I whispered. "No," he shook his head. "Anyone else would have called the police. Anyone else would have run when the bullets started flying. Anyone else would have opened that nursery door when Carlo threatened them." He reached into the back pocket of his jeans and pulled out a folded document. He slapped it against my chest. I instinctively grabbed it to keep it from falling. "Read it," he ordered. I unfolded the paper. It was heavy, legal bond. The header read, "Family Court of New York." I scanned the lines. My eyes widened. "Petition for adoption. Lily Foster. Beneficiary of the Verciani Family Trust. Full educational sponsorship. Legal guardianship transferred to Maria Foster and Roberto Verciani as joint custodians in the event of..." I looked up at him, my mouth opening and closing. "What is this?" "It is her future," Roberto said. "It is the best schools in the country. It is a trust fund that will ensure she never has to work a double shift in a diner unless she wants to. It is safety. Permanent, unbreakable safety. You adopted her. We are filing for joint guardianship," he corrected. "She is yours. But she is under my protection now, legally. If anyone tries to touch her, they answer to the Verciani estate lawyers. And then they answer to me. Roberto, I can't accept this. This is..." This is too much money. I can't pay you back. I don't want your money, he snapped, exasperated. I have enough money to buy God. I don't need payment. Then what do you want? I cried. Why are you doing this? He stared at me for a long moment. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He reached into his pocket again. This time he pulled out a small black velvet box. He didn't get down on one knee. That wasn't his style. He wasn't asking. He was stating a fact. He opened the box. Inside sat a ring that made the breath leave my lungs. It wasn't a delicate diamond like the necklace. It was a massive, dark sapphire, almost black in the dim light, surrounded by a halo of raw, uncut diamonds. It looked ancient. It looked like something a queen would wear into battle. I want you, he said. The words were simple, but they hit me with the force of a physical blow. I don't want a mistress, he continued, taking the ring out of the box. I don't want a nanny. I don't want a guest. I want a partner. He took my left hand. His grip was warm, calloused, familiar. Mateo needs a mother, he said, sliding the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, heavy and cool against my skin. But more importantly, I need you. I need the woman who hit an assassin with a serving tray. I need the woman who shot a capo in the leg to save my children. I need someone who understands the darkness because she has stared into it and didn't blink. Roberto, I whispered, looking at the ring, then at him. People will talk. They'll say I'm just the help who got lucky. They'll say I don't belong in your world. Let them talk, he said, a dark smile playing on his lips. And then watch them bow. You earned your place at this table, Maria. You bought it with blood. You are not the help. You are the queen. He lifted my hand to his lips, kissing the ring, claiming it, claiming me. No debt, he said, looking into my eyes. Just a life, a complicated, dangerous, messy life, but it will be ours. I looked at him. I saw the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the shadows of the war he fought every day, but I also saw the love. It wasn't the soft, sweet love of fairy tales. It was a fierce, burning thing. It was a love that would burn down cities to keep me warm, and I realized, with a sudden clarity, that I didn't want the easy life. I didn't want the silence of the basement apartment. I wanted the storm. Okay, I whispered. Okay? He raised an eyebrow. Okay, I said louder, a smile breaking through my tears. But if you ever try to throw my clothes out the window, I will shoot you in the leg. Roberto threw his head back and laughed, a rich, deep sound that filled the room. He pulled me into his arms, lifting me off my feet. I would expect nothing less, he growled against my neck. He kissed me then, and it felt like coming home. It felt like the final piece of the puzzle snapping into place. The missing boy was found. The missing father was restored. And the invisible girl, she was finally seen. We walked out into the garden an hour later. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in streaks of purple and gold, the colors of a bruise healing, or a royalty rising. The air was crisp, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. The lake shimmered in the distance, a mirror reflecting the vastness of the world we now owned. Mateo and Lily were near the rose bushes. They were chasing a golden retriever puppy, a surprise Roberto had arranged to be delivered that morning. Mateo was laughing. It was a sound I hadn't heard in the first week, a sound that seemed miraculous every time it bubbled out of his throat. "Get him, Leo!" Lily shouted, running in circles. "No, this way!" Mateo yelled back, his voice clear and strong. Roberto stood beside me on the porch, his arm heavy and possessive around my waist. We watched them run. We watched them live. "He speaks so well now," Roberto murmured. "2 weeks ago, I thought I would never hear his voice again. He just needed to feel safe," I said, leaning my head against Roberto's shoulder. "He needed you," Roberto corrected. We both did. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn, water-damaged, wrinkled. It was the flyer, the missing poster from that night in the rain. He unfolded it. The red letters screamed out, "Missing." He looked at it for a long moment. Then he took a gold pen from his pocket. He didn't crumple the paper. He didn't burn it. He pressed it against the wooden railing of the porch. With a few quick strokes, he crossed out the word, missing. Above it, in his sharp, angular handwriting, he wrote one word, found. He handed the paper to me. Keep it, he said. Put it in the family album, so we never forget where we started. I looked at the paper. I looked at the rain-warped photo of Mateo. I looked at the new word written in ink that shimmered in the sunset. I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket, right next to the adoption papers for Lily. Found, I whispered. Roberto turned to me, his hand cupping my face, his thumb tracing the faint scar on my cheekbone where Carlo's ring had cut me, a souvenir of the war I had won. Are you happy, Maria? He asked, searching my eyes. I looked at the children playing in the grass, safe and free. I looked at the mansion behind us, no longer a fortress, but a home. I looked at the man in front of me, the wolf who had learned to let me pet him. I thought about the cold nights in the basement. I thought about the fear. I thought about the loneliness that had been my constant companion for so long. I'm not just happy, I said, rising on my tiptoes to kiss him. I'm home. Roberto smiled against my lips. Then let's go inside. Dinner is waiting, and I believe it is your turn to say grace. My turn? I laughed. I thought the Don made the rules. The Don bows to the Queen, he murmured, sweeping me into his arms and carrying me across the threshold. Behind us, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the stars began to come out, one by one, watching over the house that love built and violence defended. The poster in my pocket felt warm against my hip. Found. It was the only word that mattered.